Story 1. My sister Alexis was very attached to me. When I was 10 years old, a dangerous man tried to kidnap her. In the end, I was the one who ended up in his car. They got the ransom money and I returned home, but my face was severely injured and my legs were broken. From that moment on, Alexis took the reins of my father's business and turned it into an empire. I became the center of her life and no one could mess with me without facing her. At school, a classmate called me Scar, and Alexis gave him such a severe beating that he was unrecognizable. Another murmured that I was disabled, and she crushed him with heavy machinery, irreversibly damaging his legs. Alexis could be ruthless with anyone, except me. She spoiled me in everything. She paid for my reconstructive surgeries, fixed my legs, and sent me to study abroad. Shortly before returning, I received a wedding invitation from her. She was happy, saying that I would soon have a brother-in-law who would appreciate me as much as she did. She even sent me a picture of her future husband. But when I arrived at the house, this man appeared with several of his assistants. Believing that I was Alexis's secret lover, he began to beat me without giving me a chance to explain myself. When Alexis finally arrived, he pointed at me on the floor and demanded, "Am I not enough for you? Is he better?" Alexis's eyes flashed with fury. Suddenly, a glass door exploded and another group of men entered, led by the same person Alexis had shown me in the photo, Jason, my supposed future brother-in-law. Before I could greet him, he hit me in the face with a metal baseball bat. I felt intense pain and noticed a trickle of blood running down my face. "I finally found you," he shouted. "You thought you could hide abroad." He raised the bat again, aiming for my head. I tried to cover myself, but I stumbled and fell to the ground. I tried to explain to him that he was wrong, that I was Alexis's brother, but he shoved the bat into my mouth, causing unbearable pain. "Don't pretend," he said. "I know you manipulated Alexis into buying you this house. You wanted to take advantage of my marrying her to profit." He kicked me, and I hit my head against the coffee table, opening my scalp. I swallowed and told him, "You're confused. I'm Alexis's brother. She sent me a message to come to the wedding." One of the men accompanying him seemed to hesitate. He'd heard she had a brother who lived abroad, but no one had seen him. They said he was her twin. Jason looked closely at me. "This one doesn't look like Alexis." Just then, Danny, my sister's right-hand man, who had been working with her for years, appeared. I begged him to recognize me, but Jason continued to assault me. They checked my ID and, seeing a different name, thought I was lying. Alexis had changed my last name and my records after what happened years ago to protect me. Danny and the others started hitting me again, until my phone fell to the floor, displaying a photo of me and Alexis as the background. Danny stopped. I tried to show him the saved conversations on my cell phone where Alexis called me brother and spoke affectionately. Still, Jason refused to believe. "Stop lying. If he really is Alexis's brother, I'll answer for it," Jason said. "If not, he'll regret ever being born." He called her and, upon learning that my arrival was scheduled for the next day, thought it had all been a trick on my part to surprise them. He hung up with the idea of finishing me off before I could explain anything. He tied me up and continued accusing me of interfering in their relationship. "She bought you a house," he complained. "Do you think I don't realize you're taking advantage of her affection?" Feeling the helplessness of the situation, I blurted out that he was messing with the wrong person. Jason became enraged and pulled out a knife, ready to disfigure me. Despite the pain, I warned him that Alexis would never forgive him for this. However, he continued hurting me until we heard the sound of heels. It was Alexis, who had just arrived. Danny, frightened, ordered me to be hidden in the kitchen. Alexis asked about the decoration of the house and ran into Jason and me on the floor. Surprised, she wanted to know what was going on. Jason told her that I was a protege of his and that he only wanted to understand why she liked me so much, so he could imitate me and make her happier. Alexis hugged him, confused. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "I only love you. That's why I'm marrying you." And so I stayed there, unable to tell her the truth, while she tried to understand the scene before her eyes. The pain still ran through every corner of my body, my mouth tasted of blood, and my head throbbed as if it were about to explode. Despite everything, what hurt me the most was not the wounds. What hurt me the most was seeing her hugging that bastard. Alexis, my sister, my savior, the person who was everything to me, was there, holding in her arms the man who had just beaten me to a pulp. No matter how hard I tried to speak, to explain the truth to her, Jason had gone ahead. He had ripped my voice away, reduced me to a mere spectator of my own suffering. "What are you talking about, love?" Alexis whispered, caressing his face with a tenderness that made my stomach churn. "I only love you. That's why I'm marrying you." Jason smiled arrogantly, but his hand continued to squeeze my shoulder, preventing me from getting up from the floor. Danny, who had been silent all this time, gave me a fleeting glance. I couldn't tell if he was hesitant or if he was simply following orders. "That's what I needed to hear," Jason said with ill-concealed satisfaction. He turned to Danny and the others. "Take him somewhere else. Let him rest." It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. Danny hesitated for a moment before nodding. Two men grabbed me by the arms and lifted me unceremoniously. I let out a groan as the weight of my own body fell on my wounds. "Be careful with him," Alexis ordered without even looking at me. It was the last thing I heard before they dragged me out of the room. They took me to one of Alexis's safe houses, a discreet building on the outskirts of the city. There, a doctor examined me in silence, without asking questions. My jaw was swollen, I had a fractured rib, and several bruises. "You're going to be fine," the doctor finally said after bandaging my torso. "But you need rest." I didn't answer, just stared at the ceiling, trying to process what had just happened. Alexis hadn't recognized me. No, that wasn't entirely true. She did recognize me, but not as her brother, not as Frankie. She had seen me as a stranger, an intruder. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Jason had won this round. But this wasn't over yet. Outside, Danny was talking to Jason on the phone. I heard him from the bed, straining to make out every word. "I'm not sure. The boss believes you, but something doesn't add up." There was a pause. Jason was answering on the other side, but I couldn't hear his voice. "Yes, I understand," Danny said. "I'll make sure he doesn't do anything stupid." He hung up. The bedroom door opened, and Danny entered with his usual inscrutable expression. He approached the bed and crossed his arms. "Tell me the truth," he said bluntly. "Are you the boss's brother or not?" I looked him in the eye, my breath ragged. "Yes, I am." Danny frowned. "If that's true, why does your ID have a different name?" I felt a lump in my throat. "Ask Alexis. She was the one who changed my records after what happened to me as a child." Danny didn't answer immediately. He studied me in silence, as if searching for any sign of a lie on my face. "I'm going to check," he finally said. "But if you're lying to me, I'll kill you myself." And with that he left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I didn't know how much time I had before Jason tried to get rid of me permanently. I had to get out of there. I had to make Alexis remember who I was before it was too late. The pain kept me awake. Although my body demanded rest, my mind refused to yield. I knew something wasn't right. Jason wouldn't risk Danny investigating too much. Not if it meant that Alexis could discover the truth. I sat up in bed with difficulty, feeling my ribs protest with every movement. The room was dim, lit only by the faint light coming through the closed blinds. I didn't have a watch, but I sensed it was late, too late. Then I heard it, a subtle noise at the window. My pulse quickened immediately. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't a branch hitting the glass. Someone was out there. I held my breath and slid towards the door without making a sound. I didn't have time to think about what I would do if they caught me. I just knew I had to get out of there. A metallic sound made me turn my head, just in time to see someone slip a pick into the door lock. Damn. I moved as fast as I could towards the window, trying to open it, but it was sealed. Damn. I had no escape. The door opened with a slight creak. I managed to see the silhouette of two men entering before I lunged towards the nightstand and grabbed the only weapon within reach, a ceramic lamp. I smashed it against the first one's face. The second reacted immediately, throwing a punch that sent me falling back onto the bed. I sat up with difficulty, just as I felt the edge of a razor blade brush against my neck. "Stay still," a deep voice murmured. "It'll be quick." The edge pressed harder. But before it could sink into my skin, the door burst open. "What the hell are you doing?" It was Danny. The men froze. I took advantage of the moment to pull away from the razor, feeling a thin trickle of blood slide down my neck. Danny pulled out his gun and pointed it at the two attackers. "Get out," he ordered in an icy voice. Now, one of them tried to say something, but Danny didn't wait. He fired at the floor, right next to his foot. The next bullet won't be a warning. The two ran out without daring to reply. I lay gasping on the bed, looking at Danny without understanding why he had saved me. It wasn't Jason who gave the order, he said as if he could read my mind. It was someone else. I stared at him. Alexis. Danny shook his head. Alexis doesn't know anything about this, but I'm starting to wonder how much more Jason is hiding from her. He put his gun away and tossed me a clean towel. Clean up the blood. I'm getting you out of here in 10 minutes. Where to? I asked, still dazed. Somewhere Jason can't find you. And for the first time in a long time, I had the feeling that I wasn't completely alone in this. The car glided along the dark highway, with Danny at the wheel and me in the passenger seat, struggling to stay conscious. The pain was unbearable, but I couldn't afford to pass out. Not now. Where are you taking me? I asked hoarsely. Danny didn't answer immediately. He kept his eyes fixed on the road, his hands firmly gripping the steering wheel. Finally, he sighed. To an old contact. Someone who can help you. I frowned. Help me? How? Danny glanced at me before returning his gaze to the front. By giving you answers. I didn't know what to say. I just looked out the window, watching as the buildings became less frequent and the city was left behind. Finally, we arrived at an abandoned warehouse. Danny turned off the engine and got out of the car without a word. Reluctantly, I followed him, though every step was torture. The warehouse door opened with a creak, and, inside, I saw a man waiting for us. He was tall, with dark hair and a stubble beard. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were full of caution. Danny greeted him in a serious voice. It's been a while since you visited, Danny. He nodded. We need help, Tomas. The man, Tomas, looked me up and down. So this is Alexis's famous brother. I tensed immediately. You do recognize me? Tomas gave a wry smile. Not exactly, but I've heard of you. Danny intervened before I could ask any more questions. Jason ordered him killed. We can't just stand by and do nothing. Tomas let out a sigh. I'm not surprised. That son of a bitch always gave me a bad feeling. He turned to me and pointed to a chair. Sit down. Let's talk. Tomas knew more about Jason than I imagined. He told me that he had worked with Alexis in the early years of her rise to power, but when Jason came into her life, everything changed. He's not who he says he is, Tomas said. He doesn't just want Alexis's power, he wants to control her completely. I already know that, I replied bitterly. Tomas shook his head. No, you don't understand. It's not just that he wants to run her businesses. Jason has been eliminating anyone who could open her eyes. And now he's doing the same with you. He leaned forward. The last woman he was engaged to disappeared without a trace. A shiver ran down my spine. Did she look? Tomas nodded. Just like everyone who's tried to warn Alexis about him. My stomach churned. Jason wasn't just a manipulator, he was a murderer. Tomas looked at me intently. If you want to save your sister, you need proof. Something that forces her to see the truth. My mind was racing. Jason had taken everything from me. He had humiliated me, beaten me, and nearly killed me. But now I had something he didn't expect, allies. And I wasn't going to waste the opportunity. My breathing was heavy, but not from the pain in my ribs. It was from the contained rage. Jason wasn't just a controlling psychopath, he was a killer. Danny and Tomas were talking in low voices a few meters away from me, but their words were lost in the whirlwind of thoughts that filled my head. Alexis was in danger, and I, her brother, the only person she ever trusted, had been reduced to nothing more than an intruder who was almost killed. No, I couldn't allow it. We need proof, I said suddenly, interrupting Danny and Tomas' conversation. Both turned to me. You're right, Tomas replied, but Jason isn't stupid. He's made sure to erase any trace of what he's done. There's always something, I insisted. No one disappears without a trace. Danny crossed his arms. If he really eliminated his ex, he did it with someone's help. Tomas nodded. And I know exactly where to start. He led us to a small apartment in a discreet neighborhood of the city. He knocked on the door with a specific series of knocks. The peephole opened and suspicious eyes observed us. Let us in. We don't have time, Tomas ordered. The door cracked open and a man let us in. He was thin, with graying hair and trembling hands. You shouldn't have brought them, he muttered nervously. Don't worry, Elias, Tomas replied. We just want information. Elias observed me carefully. Are you Alexis's brother? I clenched my jaw. Yes. Elias swallowed. If Jason finds out you're here, he'll kill me. If you don't help us, you might be next on his list anyway, Danny said coldly. Elias remained silent for a few seconds. Then he sighed. Okay, I'll tell you what I know. Jason had been engaged to a woman named Victoria, a businesswoman with important contacts. At first, everything seemed to be going well, but when she started questioning him and investigating his past, she disappeared. The official story was that she left the country, Elias explained, but I know that's not true. I took out my phone. Do you have proof? Elias hesitated. Just rumors and a security camera video. He got up and went to a back room. He returned with a USB drive and handed it to me. I can't give you anything more. I took it carefully. This will do. Back in the car, Danny inserted the USB drive into his laptop. The video was of a dark street. Jason could be seen talking to a man. Then, the man opened the trunk of a car, and, inside, there was a body wrapped in black plastic. My stomach churned. The wedding day arrived like a silent storm. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but beneath the feigned calm, chaos was about to erupt. Jason didn't suspect a thing. He thought he had everything under control. But Alexis was no longer his puppet. I was hidden in the mansion, waiting for the right moment to act. Danny was with me, keeping an eye on Jason's movements. When Alexis gives the signal, we go in. Danny reminded me in a low voice. I nodded, feeling my heart pound. I couldn't afford to fail. From my hiding place, I watched the ceremony begin. Alexis was radiant, but her expression was cold. Jason, on the other hand, smiled arrogantly, believing he had the world in his hands. The priest began to speak, and the moment was approaching. Then, Alexis made her move. Before we continue, she said suddenly, her voice clear and firm, I have something to say. The murmur among the guests grew. Jason frowned, trying not to show his discomfort. Alexis, darling, let's talk later. This isn't the time. She pulled out her phone and, with a single touch, played the video. The images filled the screens of the hall. Jason froze when he saw his own face in the recording. The silence became unbearable. And then, chaos erupted. Jason tried to react, but Alexis already had everything planned. Do you have anything to say, Jason? She asked, venom in her voice. He glared at her. This is a trick. No, this is the truth. Alexis's guards surrounded him, but Jason wasn't a man who gave up easily. In a single movement, he pulled out a hidden weapon. If I can't have you, no one will, he shouted, pointing it at her and me. Jason turned to me with the gun ready, but Alexis was faster. The shot echoed through the air. Jason fell to the ground. Alexis looked at him expressionlessly as he struggled to breathe. She knelt beside him and whispered, You were never enough. Jason breathed his last. It was over. Jason's body lay on the floor, blood darkening the luxurious marble of the hall. The music had stopped. The guests stared at the scene with horror and fascination, as if they couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Alexis remained standing beside him, still holding the gun firmly. Her white dress had a red stain on the skirt, but she didn't seem to care. Her expression was impenetrable. I could barely breathe. The man who nearly killed me, who manipulated my sister, who destroyed lives without remorse, was finally dead. But this wasn't over. The guards mobilized quickly. Some escorted the guests out of the hall, others secured the area. Danny approached Alexis cautiously. Boss, we need to leave. Alexis blinked, as if she were just coming out of a trance. I know, she whispered. Her eyes lifted to meet mine. For the first time in a long time, there was no distance between us. Without saying a word, she held out her hand. I took it. Together, we left the hall, leaving behind Jason's corpse and everything it represented. Back at the mansion, the atmosphere was tense. No one spoke. No one dared to look directly at Alexis. Danny led us to her office and closed the door behind us. The police will come with questions, he said. But everything is taken care of. It will be considered self-defense. Alexis nodded slowly. I don't care about the police. I want to know who else was with him. Her voice was cold, calculating. Jason was dead, but his shadow could still haunt us. We're not going to find out, I assured her. And with that I left. I didn't know what awaited me out there, but for the first time in my life, I was ready to find out. The air smelled different since I'd been gone. The days had been strange. Being away from Alexis, away from the mansion, away from the life I had always known was like walking on ground I'd never stepped on before. But little by little, I learned to move without fear, to be Frankie, not just Alexis's brother. Time passed. Months later, I received a call. Frankie, the voice on the other end said, I need you to come back. It was Danny, and his tone left no room for questions. When I returned, I found Alexis in her office, staring out the window. Danny said you wanted to see me. She turned to me, and then I noticed it. She was different. More serene, stronger, freer. I've made a decision, she said bluntly. I'm leaving the business for a while. My eyes widened in surprise. Really? She nodded. For the first time in my life, I want to do something for myself. I let out a small laugh. It seems we've switched roles. She smiled. Maybe. We were silent for a moment, and then she extended her hand. Let's make a deal. No matter where we go, what we do, what paths we take, we'll always have each other. I looked at her and took her hand. Always. Story 2. My daughter-in-law wanted to exclude me from my grandson's birthday party in my own home. So they can pack up, I changed the locks, and I taught them a lesson. Hello everyone. My name is Romaine. I am 67 years old, and I live in a small suburb near Savannah, Georgia. I have been a widower for a little over 2 years. My wife, whom I loved with all my soul, passed away after a long battle against cancer. Since then, the house has felt too big for me, with its 4 bedrooms and the huge garden that we both cared for with such dedication. Despite the loneliness, I have strived to keep standing everything that she and I built together. I have lived very hard days, but I also found comfort in my son Carter and in my little grandson Ian, who recently turned 1 year old. Precisely, Ian's birth was a light of hope in the midst of my pain. Seeing him smile was enough to remind me that life goes on. Before all this chaos arrived, my relationship with my daughter-in-law Amelia was cordial. We were not the best of friends, but I always believed that we had a decent bond. In fact, when Carter lost his job in the middle of the economic crisis, I didn't hesitate for a second to open the doors of my home for them to move in with me temporarily. I knew very well how complicated it can be to rent something in this area with unstable income, and I thought that the best thing for my grandson and for them was to be under the same roof where they didn't have to worry about paying rent. It was a decision that I made willingly and which I sincerely did not regret, at least at first, until a few weeks ago. I felt happy sharing the house with my son and my daughter-in-law, and especially for the opportunity to see Ian grow up. However, as time passed, I began to notice certain attitudes in Amelia that I found uncomfortable. Amelia has always been a bit reserved with me, but I attributed it to the fact that she came from a different environment. According to what Carter told me, she grew up in a family of good economic status. Her father is a lawyer, and her mother is an influential businesswoman in the real estate sector. Although I don't know them very well, they seem to lead a comfortable life somewhere in California. My late wife and I, on the other hand, have always been working-class people. I retired after driving trucks for 30 years. I saved enough to ensure our old age, and I acquired this house years ago. We never lacked the basics, but we didn't swim in luxury either. What began to tense was the relationship between Amelia and me. Her passive-aggressive comments towards me and towards the house began to become more frequent. On occasions, I heard her talking to Carter about how outdated my decorations were, or how much she dreamed of another type of home. I didn't give it too much importance at first, as each generation has its tastes. The problem was that I noticed how they progressively involved me less in family life inside my own house. Sometimes, even when I was present, they seemed to prefer to make plans alone with Ian, as if I didn't matter at all. The last straw came when a good friend of mine, Henry, mentioned to me in one of our morning walks that he had received an invitation for my grandson Ian's birthday. I didn't even know that a big party was being organized. I thought that Henry was mistaken about the date or the child, but no, he himself showed me a very flashy invitation card where Ian's name clearly appeared, along with a date and an address that, to my surprise, was my own house. It was so shocking to see for the first time that card with an expensive design, bright colors, and even directions for a big meal, when I, the grandfather, had no idea about anything. It was a direct blow to my pride, but above all to my heart. My first impulse was to think that perhaps the invitation had been lost, or that Carter had forgotten to give it to me in the middle of the hustle and bustle. I didn't want to prejudge. I told myself, it can't be that they are excluding you on purpose from your grandson's party in your own house. It sounded ridiculous, right? However, that doubt was pounding in my head nonstop all night. The next day, I tried to talk to Carter and Amelia about it. I found my grandson playing in the living room while Amelia was absorbed in her phone. When I asked her discreetly if they were organizing something for Ian's birthday, she answered with evasions, almost as if she didn't want to admit anything. Carter barely directed a couple of words to me, visibly nervous. I perceived the tense atmosphere, as if they had conspired to keep me out of the loop. It was then when my friend Henry gave me more details. He showed me photos of the invitation, confirming that it was not a small event, but a whole celebration with dinner for adults and even children's entertainment. 1,000 questions began to pass through my mind. What reason would they have for not wanting to invite me? Why organize it secretly in my own house? And who was going to cover the costs? Carter still doesn't have a stable job, Amelia doesn't work either, and I am already a retiree, although with certain savings. Had they perhaps planned to use the money that I occasionally lent them to set up this big party? Or worse, did they intend to kick me out of the house for that day, pretending that I didn't live there? My concern grew so much that I decided not to sit idly by. That said, I was still not sure how to act. Part of me wanted to believe that it was all a misunderstanding, and that at any moment they were going to say, "Happy surprise. It was just a plan to do something special, and we didn't want to ruin it for you." But it became increasingly evident that something was rotten in this story. I could no longer ignore Amelia's cold looks, nor the way Carter tried to avoid the topic. The same afternoon that I discovered the existence of the party, I mustered the courage to ask my son Carter directly what they were planning. I found him arranging some of Ian's toys in the living room, and I said to him, trying to sound as calm as possible, "Son, is there something I should know about Ian's birthday? I heard rumors that there will be a big gathering, a party with quite a few people, and I haven't received an invitation or any official details." Carter turned pale in a matter of seconds. His hands began to tremble while he tried to fit a plastic piece into the toy box. It was evident that he was not prepared for me to drop such a question on him so suddenly. For a moment, he thought of letting out a nervous laugh to feign surprise, but a forced gesture came out. "Ah, yes, Dad. Well, Amelia has been planning something small, just a cake and a couple of neighbors to sing happy birthday. I suppose the invitation was delayed." He paused, noticing that my expression was absolutely skeptical. "I should have mentioned it to you. The truth is that we weren't sure about anything yet. Something small," I repeated almost in a whisper. Henry showed me a quite elegant invitation with a date, place, and even a dinner menu for the guests. It said my address, Carter, and you say you're not sure? The expression on his face was worth more than 1,000 words. I knew that I had caught him lying. However, he seemed terrified, as if a great weight fell on him. Without saying another word, he hurried out into the hallway, and the last thing I heard was the door of the room slamming shut. There, I clearly sensed that the orchestrator of everything was Amelia. It wasn't the first time that my son had hidden behind the tactic of not confronting his wife to save himself discussions. I was left with a bitter taste, wondering how a father could be excluded from his grandson's life in that way. It was so unfair. Later, I prepared to go out to my front porch to get some air. In the distance, I saw the car of Henry, my dear friend and neighbor, arriving. Without even getting out of the car, he motioned for me to come closer. I went down the steps and went to the window. Henry looked worried. "Hey, Romaine, I don't want to meddle where I'm not called, but I was talking to some neighbors, and indeed many of them are invited to little Ian's party. I've even seen balloons, decorations, and tents rented in a place on the other side of town. They say everything is under Amelia's name. Look, I don't care, but it seemed strange to me that you didn't know. So, I wanted to check if you had already talked to your son." "Yes, Henry. I talked to him a few minutes ago, and as I supposed, he is covering for Amelia. She doesn't want me to attend the party, or worse, she didn't even plan to include me." Henry was silent for a moment, with his eyes fixed on the steering wheel. Then, he told me something that chilled me to the bone. "I also found out that Amelia has been borrowing money from someone in the neighborhood, saying that it was for the child and some medical expenses when in reality it could be that she was meeting with an event organizer. I don't want to spread gossip, but it seemed very suspicious to me. That was another blow to my patience. Throughout my life, I have been prudent with money. I suffered firsthand what it is to live from day to day when I could barely support Carter and my wife with my truck driver salary. Handing over my savings, even in difficult moments, was not something I did lightly, except if it was about my family. However, they had already asked me for contributions on more than one occasion for Carter's car, supposedly threatened with foreclosure, and for the rent that they should theoretically pay partially to the previous owner before moving in with me. Would it all have been part of a bigger deception to finance a luxurious party? I decided to look for Carter once more, hoping to clarify the matter. I knocked on the door of his room, and he let me pass with his head down. I wanted to address Amelia, but she preferred to stay looking at her cell phone, sitting on an armchair on the side. The atmosphere was tense. Ian was playing with a balloon on the floor, and he couldn't even imagine that his family was about to crack due to an absurd problem that involved his birthday. Carter, I need to know the truth. I found out that you have been gathering money and that it is for this party that you plan to give. Henry has shown me evidence of the invitation. You know that I am not making it up. Explain to me why I was left out. Why? Dad, it's that. Carter stammered without daring to raise his voice more than necessary. Amelia wanted something different for the celebration, something more sophisticated. She believes that your house is not the best place to receive her parents and her friends. That's why she spoke with an organizer to fix the decoration, and she wanted to tell you at the last moment that the party would be moved to another place. I don't know exactly what she was planning to do, I swear. She just told me to trust her. Amelia raised her eyes at last with an arrogant gesture. Come on, Romaine, it's not a big deal. We want to give Ian a great first birthday. Is that not normal nowadays? She said with a mixture of sarcasm and condescension. Your house is fine to live in temporarily, but when my family comes to visit, I don't want to bother with the old decoration, the smell of damp wood, and all those tools thrown in the garage. We thought it was better to obviate those details, and well, as for the invitation, I didn't want to hurt your feelings. I thought it was evident that you would be present, but I suppose that the card never reached your hands. I could feel my cheeks burning with helplessness. Did she perhaps believe that I was a piece of furniture that could be obviated when it suited her, or did she think that I didn't even deserve a formal invitation, despite being Ian's grandfather and the owner of the house in which they lived without paying rent? Carter kept silent, perhaps ashamed of himself. Suddenly, Ian's crying cut off the discussion, and I had to withdraw my words, at least for an instant. This story cannot end well, I thought to myself. I was beginning to feel that the wound was opening more and more, and that the disappointment of seeing my own son submitting to Amelia's whims was breaking my heart. But there was still a twist, an even more bitter one that would arrive when I found out what they had really planned for the day of the birthday, and how they intended to completely exclude me from the family photograph. The following days passed with an atmosphere so thick that it could almost be cut with scissors. After our last exchange, Amelia didn't even bother to hide her disdain towards me, and Carter was too nervous, as if walking on broken glass every time I was near. I found myself in a kind of emotional limbo. On one hand, hurt to feel relegated inside my own home. On the other hand, furious to suspect that a large part of the money that I had lent them went to a party to which, at first glance, I didn't seem to be invited. One night, while trying to watch the news on my old television, I heard Amelia talking on the phone in the hallway. Although she tried to lower her voice, I could hear some loose phrases. She mentioned to her parents that they would come from somewhere in California, and something about not wanting a certain person interfering with the image that she wanted to project for Ian's birthday. It didn't take a genius to understand that the uncomfortable person was me. I remained silent, pretending to be concentrated on the news, but each word confirmed to me that Amelia was planning the celebration without the slightest intention of including me. I felt as if I were spying on someone else's conversation in my own house. After hanging up, Amelia returned to the living room, and I noticed out of the corner of my eye her expression of annoyance at seeing me there. We didn't exchange words. She simply sat at one end of the sofa with her phone in her hand, opening and closing applications while I tried to keep my composure. What ended up detonating my nerves happened the following morning. I had the habit of going out to the porch to check my correspondence, mainly bank bills, advertising, and the occasional flyer, when I found a thick envelope of flashy appearance with an unknown sender. Opening it, I saw several deposit receipts that certain neighbors and acquaintances had made to Carter and Amelia's account, as well as some payments to decoration and catering companies based in Atlanta, about 4 hours by car from Savannah. One of the amounts far exceeded the amount that Carter had recently borrowed from me. Why would that documentation have arrived in my mailbox? I had no idea, but I assumed it was an error of the same company or some improper cross-correspondence. The alarming thing was that the enormous sum of money invested in Ian's party was totally exposed. They must have spent more than $10,000 in total, I muttered, glancing at the papers, feeling dizzy at those figures. $10,000 on a 1-year-old's birthday, I exclaimed incredulously. And although I knew that some parents have big parties, it was too disproportionate in the situation in which Carter and Amelia found themselves. That same day, instead of keeping the finding to myself, I presented myself in the kitchen where Amelia was preparing a coffee and Carter was washing some glasses. I deposited the receipts on the table without saying anything. They looked at each other with faces of fright. "I'm not interested in knowing how you got this money," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "But I demand an explanation of why you have been hiding the organization of this event, especially if it is about my grandson's birthday and if it is being financed, at least in part, with my savings." Amelia let out a sigh loaded with annoyance. She left the cup on the counter with a dull blow that made the coffee splash. "Look, Romaine, enough is enough. Understand that I want a decent environment for my family and my friends. Your old furniture, the unpainted walls, and that lamentable garden full of weeds are not the environment I want for Ian. My parents like elegance, and frankly, I don't see myself receiving them here for such an important event. Besides, if you are so bothered that we borrow money, you shouldn't have offered it, don't you think?" The coldness with which she expressed herself left me stunned. It was the first time that I perceived such an open contempt towards my home and my lifestyle. Carter, for his part, at my side remained in a dangerous mutism. He didn't even try to mediate. Seeing my own son accepting with his head down that humiliation was the last straw. "So my house is lamentable?" "Perfect," I replied with a tone that I couldn't contain. "Then what the hell are you still living here for months? Why didn't you look for a more dignified place for you?" Amelia let out a brief, sarcastic laugh, as if what I had said was the most absurd comment in the world. "Is it so difficult to understand that Carter and I don't have enough money for a rent to the taste of my family? I am trying to prevent Ian from growing up surrounded by lacks, nor of—" She stopped for a second, looking at her son who was running through the hallway. "Nor of mediocrity, Romaine. I'm sorry, but it's the truth." At that moment, I noticed how my hands were trembling with rage. I turned around and simply left the kitchen so as not to worsen the situation in front of Ian. I spent a while in the garden trying to appease the tremor of my heart. I felt that I had two strangers sleeping under my roof and that my grandson was caught in the crossfire. How did we get to this? To make matters worse, the following afternoon Carter asked me for another economic favor. He assured with a broken voice that he had to cover the extra cost of some decorations. It was ridiculous. He didn't care that I was incredulous and offended. He still believed that he could abuse my goodwill. I tried not to lose my composure, but my answer was immediate. "Carter, not one more penny, do you understand? Not one." He didn't insist much. It was noticeable that my refusal bothered him, but he didn't want to aggravate the situation and risk me saying something much worse. I saw him turn around and march to the backyard where Amelia received him with a frown, looking at me out of the corner of her eye through the window. I had the feeling that at any moment she would accuse me of being an obstacle to the great plans that she wanted for Ian. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. That wealthy family that Amelia longed to please would come to meet her grandson, and the perfect scenario for her was a party worthy of a magazine. What was not in her plans was my presence, nor my dusty house where, by the way, they lived for free. Her next step, apparently, would be to find a way to get me out of the way on the day of the party so that I would not ruin the aesthetics in front of the guests. The question was how far they would be willing to go. 2 days later, a couple of decorators sent from Atlanta arrived to evaluate the patio, the porch, and the living room. I stood aside watching perplexed as they measured walls and discussed the supposed ideal distribution. One of them asked me politely who I was. "I am the owner of the house," I replied with a slight ironic smile. "Is there any problem?" The man apologized, surprised. Evidently, he had no idea that the house didn't belong to Carter. I observed the uncomfortable grimace that he shared with his colleague and knew immediately that something didn't fit in the version that Amelia had offered them. It was a brief instant of vicarious embarrassment for all. After a few minutes, they finished their measurements and left in a white van towards the city. That episode confirmed my suspicions. Amelia wanted to pretend that they were the owners, or at least the main tenants of the property, and that the party would be without interferences. And if they asked me where I would be, they would surely answer that I was just a grandfather who would come to visit, or perhaps not even that. I began to consider my options. I was tormented by the idea of sitting idly by doing nothing, allowing my daughter-in-law to walk all over me. It also hurt me to think about Ian and how later he would grow up wrapped in this family drama if things were not resolved soon. Part of me felt that I should set limits before it was too late. I still didn't know how or when, but I was determined to assert my rights. After all, I was not an intruder in that house. I was its legitimate owner, and while Carter and Amelia didn't show the least respect towards me, I would have to put in motion some drastic plan. Nobody, absolutely nobody, was going to evict me from my home or prohibit me from attending my great-grandson's first birthday. Although I still didn't imagine the magnitude of what would come, something inside me shouted that it was time to raise my voice and end this humiliation. My sleepless nights began to multiply since I noticed the presence of the decorators and discovered their plans for the party, financed with loans from neighbors and, who knows, perhaps also with part of my money. My mind didn't stop imagining confrontation scenarios. Sometimes I imagined myself facing Amelia and Carter, shouting, demanding explanations, and claiming my place in my grandson's life. Other times I dreamed that my political in-laws, Amelia's parents, appeared and reproached me for not being fine enough for the party. In those dreams, I ran furious to the garage, kicking them out. However, as much as my blood boiled, something was stopping me from reaching that extreme. The feeling that my grandson Ian would be the great affected of any rupture between us. The day before the party, I woke up before dawn, unable to sleep. I went down to the kitchen to make myself a coffee, a habit that I shared with my late wife, and I came across an uncomfortable scene. Amelia was talking on a video call with someone who seemed to be her father, while Carter was checking several boxes on the floor. They had adhesive tapes with the label of a catering company from Atlanta, in addition to other small packages that seemed to be ornaments. When I entered the room, Amelia tensed up like a spring. She threw me a look of disapproval, and then, without bothering to lower the volume, she continued with her call. I could hear her say, "Yes, Dad, we made sure that everything is perfect. Luckily, Carter and I will be able to have the entire house on Sunday. Don't worry, you'll see how well we have organized this." The part about having the entire house resonated in my ears. Did they really plan to leave me out of my own home? I left the cup of coffee aside, and I approached, pretending to look for a napkin near where they were. Amelia almost immediately turned the phone so as not to show me on the screen and ended the call with a hypocritical smile. "Good morning, Romaine," she murmured without enthusiasm. "Good morning," I replied with a knot in my throat. "Is something wrong with the house? I heard you mention that you would have it entirely for the party." She gave me a look of disgust, as if I had just gotten into something that didn't concern me. Without answering, she got up and went to the living room, where she took her phone again. Carter closed the cardboard box and looked at me with a guilty expression. "Dad, sorry if you have heard something out of context. Amelia just wanted to say that, well, tomorrow the house will be completely dedicated to Ian's celebration." And he lowered his head. "Maybe it would be more comfortable if you went out for a while to clear your mind, you know? Avoid the bustle and things like that." I blurted out with a thread of voice, almost incredulous. "You want me to leave my own house on my grandson's first birthday?" Carter ruffled his hair, very nervous. "It's not that, Dad, don't misunderstand it. You could come back later, when the party is advanced." "Amelia, well, Amelia fears that there are many guests, that the house will be filled, and she believes that you might feel uncomfortable." I noticed that he was stammering unconvincing excuses. The words were burning in my mouth. I was sick of so much humiliation, but I restrained myself. I took a deep breath and opted not to stoop to an absurd fight at that moment. Better to save my energies for a definitive plan. Although out of respect for my grandson, I didn't want to ruin the celebration. It was becoming clearer that Amelia had twisted the situation to leave me in the role of unwanted tenant. I was the owner. I had offered shelter and economic support, and now they were asking me with subtle hypocrisy to leave for a few hours so as not to bother their guests. Thus passed the morning with an air so dense that we could barely maintain a normal conversation. When the afternoon arrived, I decided to go out in my truck for a drive around the neighborhood. I needed to clear my mind, and by the way, visit my good friend Henry to tell the latest news. I found him fixing his wooden fence with a drill. He greeted me with a worried gesture. "How are you, Romaine?" The whole neighborhood is talking about the big party that will be held in your house, but I understand that you are not very enthusiastic. I sighed wearily. I have no idea how the word spread so quickly, Henry. Look, the truth is that I am about to explode. Amelia wants me to leave my own house at the time of the party, as if I were an intruder. Carter does nothing but nod to everything she says. And to top it off, they are spending a fortune on the celebration when they don't even have to pay a normal rent elsewhere. Henry left the drill on the floor and took off his gloves. Listen, Romaine, it's not my business, but I've known you for years. You are a generous and too tolerant man sometimes. People get used to taking your kindness for weakness. Perhaps it's time to set clear limits. My friend's words resonated strongly within me. He was right. I had always been the good guy who loosened up in order to avoid conflicts. But this time the lack of respect had gone too far. As we talked, I considered the possibility of doing something firmer to recover my dignity, although I was still not sure in what way. After my talk with Henry, I went to the local hardware store to buy a few new locks, not with the immediate intention of using them, but just in case. I called Juliet, an old friend of my wife who lives in Jacksonville, south of the border with Georgia, to let off steam a little. Upon hearing the news, she was incredulous. Romaine, this is unheard of. I think you are justifiably angry. Make them understand once and for all that that is your property, your house, and that you also have the right to your grandson. I hung up the phone with my heart pounding. I was already tired of being the receiver of contempt and hypocrisy. Still, I didn't want to take an extreme step without thinking about it carefully. Was it worth provoking a scandal on Ian's birthday? My grandson didn't deserve a traumatic memory in his first year of life. But there was something that I was very clear about. I was not going to remain silent if they invited me, or rather demanded me, to disappear at the moment when my grandson blew out the candles. That night before going to bed, I sat at the dining room table with a notebook and a pen. There, I listed some points that I was not willing to give up. The right to be present. I was not going to leave the house. My dignity. I was not going to tolerate Amelia continuing to treat me as if I were a simple nuisance. The respect to my home. Nobody would despise me again in the house that I bought with the sweat of my brow. For hours my head spun nonstop around how to react. With each passing minute, my decision was becoming stronger. If Amelia insisted on excluding me, I had the legal and moral power to make it clear who is in charge in this house. For the first time in my life, I felt the determination to impose myself, even if I had to reach a drastic act. I went to bed with the conviction that the next day, the big day of the party, I was ready for anything. I was no longer going to allow them to snatch away the role of grandfather, much less my house. What I didn't suspect was that Amelia's attitude was going to exceed all limits, pushing me to execute the most radical idea that I had ever imagined. The big day of Ian's birthday finally arrived, and with it all the omens of chaos that had been accumulating inside me. I woke up early. It was impossible to sleep with the mixture of anxiety and rage that was gnawing at me. I noticed a lot of movement in the house. Delivery trucks, people getting out boxes and decorations, constant calls to Amelia's cell phone to confirm the arrival of her parents from California. What hurt me the most was seeing that in all that frantic organization, no one even spoke to me. I spent most of the morning in the garage, observing from a distance how they installed large floral arrangements in the front garden and elegant tents in the backyard. The contrast was brutal. While the organizers talked with Amelia and Carter about the location of the tables, I took refuge between tools and old tires, holding the knot in my throat. In theory, I was invited. It wasn't logical that the grandfather of the honoree was left out, but the reality was that no one approached me to tell me the program of the event. No one bothered to tell me what time the people would arrive or where I should sit. Near noon, I heard the back door opening and closing forcefully. I peeked out cautiously. It was Amelia who was holding Ian in her arms. She looked an impeccable dress and wore a serious face. The little one wore a blue suit with a tiny bow on the neck, truly adorable. But what came next swept away my heart. Amelia approached the garage, looked at me coldly, and said, "Romaine, I need you to please leave for at least a couple of hours. My parents are about to arrive at the airport, and I don't want any uncomfortable situation. When they arrive here, everyone will be dressed for the occasion, and it doesn't seem appropriate for you to be wandering around with that old work uniform. And sorry, but you smell like oil and metal." I couldn't believe her audacity. She didn't even try to sugarcoat her words. I grabbed a rag that I had in my hand, and I squeezed it so hard that I felt the burning in my fingers. Amelia, do you realize what you are asking? I am Ian's grandfather, and it is my house. In any case, if something bothers you, you could have told me in a different way. She shook her head impatiently, as if she were talking to a capricious child. Okay, let's make a deal. You can be at the party, but when my family arrives, please don't hang around as if you were part of the organization, and for God's sake, change your clothes. She turned around and returned to the living room without waiting for a reply. I was petrified, assimilating her tone and above all the way she held my grandson while she spoke to me with such arrogance. Once again, pride and humiliation were mixed inside me. I thought of Carter, how bad his passive complicity made me feel. I thought of the times that I had paid his overdue bills, of the nights that I watched over Ian's health when he was cold and they slept until late, in every detail that I did in good faith, and my blood boiled for Amelia's ingratitude. It was almost 2 in the afternoon when suddenly the laughter of several guests sounded. I looked out and saw a group of neighbors and acquaintances entering through the main door with gifts in their hands. Some greeted me with a look as if they were doubting if it was allowed to address the word to me. I answered with a slight gesture, feeling completely out of place. Minutes later, the luxurious truck that brought Amelia's parents finally arrived. A tall and gray-haired man went down first wearing a gray suit, then his wife with an elegant dress. Immediately, Carter and Amelia ran to receive them with big hugs and smiles while I remained on the sidelines from the distance. I managed to hear a conversation that chilled my blood. "Is he the owner?" asked Amelia's father, tilting his head to look at me from the other end of the garden. "Oh no," Amelia replied. "He's a relative who has given us temporary accommodation, but don't worry, he won't interfere with anything." That phrase hurt me more than a punch. A relative who has given us accommodation. Even my father-in-law relegated me to the status of a marginal guest, someone without importance. I could have jumped at that very moment and shout the truth to them, but something told me to breathe and endure a little longer, waiting for the perfect occasion for my next movement. I decided to return to take refuge in the garage, where I kept a box that contained tools and, more importantly, a complete set of new locks. I had been considering it for several days, and that instant seemed the catalyst that confirmed everything. It was the moment to act with a firm hand. I wanted first of all to make sure that Ian was safe. I found him in the living room surrounded by balloons, with a couple of children playing next to him and several adults chatting standing. Let's make sure they arrived. I put in motion to prepare what was necessary. I entered my bedroom and picked up the few objects of value that I treasured: photographs of my late wife, some personal documents, the pocket watch that I inherited from my father. Then, I looked out to make sure that Amelia and Carter were still busy with the guests. The noise in the backyard was deafening. Music, laughter, the typical happy birthday shouted out loud. Surely they thought that I, not being giving the note, had left. They didn't even imagine that the real surprise was about to explode. My friends arrived through the side door, Henry at the head carrying his own toolbox. I explained to them in short words the situation and asked them to act quickly. While in the backyard the celebration continued at full speed, we started working on the locks of each of the access doors. First the main door, then the garage door, and finally the back door. We had to do it with the utmost care and in silence so as not to unleash the chaos before time. In less than half an hour, we had all the entrances secured with my new locks and copies of keys in my pocket. From time to time, I glanced outside through the windows, seeing the guests distracted in the celebration, Amelia walking with her look of perfect hostess, and Carter always downcast, trying to please his wife and his in-laws. When we finished, I went to my room and picked up Carter and Amelia's clothes and belongings that were distributed in furniture and closets. Some things from Ian also stayed there, but I left them separated with the utmost care. I would never put my grandson's things on the street. Instead, the personal objects of my dear guests ended up in a corner of the hallway. I dedicated a look of pity to them, and I thought of everything I had tolerated in these months. Shortly after, I started moving those belongings to the hall. Just at that moment, Amelia's grandfather, a white-haired man, came out of the bathroom. He saw me out of the corner of his eye and froze when observing my maneuver. Immediately, he called Amelia, who appeared with a frown. "Romaine, what are you doing with our things?" Correcting an injustice, I replied, firm. "Enough is enough. This house is mine, and I'm going to recover it." Amelia let out a laugh of incredulity. Carter arrived in a hurry, and some guests peeked out to see what was happening. I felt their eyes fixed on the back of my neck. I took a deep breath, and without raising my voice, I continued. I am not going to allow myself to be treated as an intruder. They have humiliated me. They have used my money. They have belittled my home, and yet they intended to exclude me from my grandson's party. I have been putting up with everything for months, but it's over. Collect your things, Amelia, and yours, Carter. The commotion was total. Amelia protested, screaming, "You're crazy. It's Ian's birthday. You can't do this to us right now. We're going to be left on the street. We have nowhere to go." I gritted my teeth. It hurt me to evoke that in part one did it knowing that my grandson would also suffer, but I couldn't tolerate 1 minute more of vexations in my own home. I looked at Carter, who kept his eyes fixed on the floor, paler than ever. He tried to stammer, "Dad, don't do this. I promise that we are going to invite you to everything." "Enough with empty promises, Carter." I burst out. "I gave you a roof, money, and my affection. You kept quiet every time Amelia disrespected me. Even today, when I asked you for explanations, you only knew how to hide behind her." With the noise of the discussion, the music stopped, and several guests appeared at the entrance, forming a semicircle, among them Amelia's parents, who watched us with suspicion. That was undoubtedly the worst way to conclude a party, but also the only way to recover my dignity. "I'm not throwing out my grandson," I clarified with a broken voice. "It breaks my heart, but I can't keep living with you under the same roof. If you want, you can seek help in a hotel or in the house of whoever you want, but not in this house." It was a real show. Amelia screamed that I was a cruel and spiteful man. Her parents glared at me, too indignant to articulate a word. Some frightened children began to cry among the hubbub. Henry and my other friends stood aside, watching how the party that barely lasted a couple of hours fell apart. Carter, with tears in his eyes, held Ian, who began to get restless before the tense atmosphere. Seeing that I didn't yield, Amelia picked up her bag and shot out, calling her mother so she would follow her. Carter, with Ian in his arms, looked at me with desperation. "Dad, please, I'm sorry, let us spend at least tonight." I remained silent, trying to repress the emotions that threatened to overflow. I knew that after that emotional slam the consequences would be very hard, but I also knew that there was no going back. I limited myself to answering, "Carter, all this would have been avoided if you had had the courage to defend me. It's not the first time that your wife offends me. With Ian, I have no problem. He is my grandson, and I love him with all my being. But you and Amelia have lost respect for me completely. Today I changed the locks of my dignity. Now I changed those of my house." The silence that followed was sepulchral. Carter nodded with reddened eyes and left for the garden, crossing the guests who, confused, began to withdraw. Thus the great party crumbled, and thus, without red carpets or fireworks, I concluded my personal revolt. Already entered the afternoon. The house was empty and in a painful mess. Deflated balloons, tablecloths half set, and used dishes. I sat in the living room exhausted. I felt an enormous weight in my chest, as if I had launched an emotional bomb whose collateral damage would reach my own grandson. But at the same time, a part of me felt liberated, as if I had finally recovered my place and my respect. I was not proud of the spectacle, nor of Carter's tears. Neither did the perspective of not seeing Ian so often make me happy. However, I understood that I could no longer keep silent. Sometimes the line between tolerance and abuse becomes blurred, and one has to recover his dignity whatever it takes. Perhaps time and circumstances lead Carter to reconsider, and Amelia to understand that the family is not a decorative object to show off in front of her parents. Meanwhile, even if they accuse me of being the grumpy grandfather who sabotaged the party, I will continue to cling to the certainty that I did the right thing to preserve my peace and the value of my home. And so culminated the worst birthday party I have ever attended. Or rather, from which they kicked me out, but at the same time I completely recovered it. Story 3. I discovered that my pregnant fiancée was cheating on me with my best friend, so I ruined their plans at the baby shower in front of everyone, and then took the cruelest revenge possible. It all started a few years ago when I thought I was in the best moment of my life. I was 29 years old, with a good career as an engineer in Texas. Although I wasn't swimming in money, I was comfortable and proud of what I had achieved with my effort. Since high school, I was always a person who worked hard and tried to do the right thing. Nothing was easy for me, but in the end, I always repeated to myself that things were worth it if they were achieved cleanly. Also, I had met who I thought was the love of my life. She was everything someone could wish for: funny, ambitious, gorgeous. From the moment we met at a friend's party, something in me told me she was the one. After a few months of dating, things between us became serious. We moved in together to a small but cozy apartment, and 2 years later, I proposed marriage. She cried with joy, and I felt like the luckiest man in the world. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but what relationship is? We had some arguments like any couple, but we always found a way to resolve them, or so I thought. A few months after getting engaged, she gave me the most incredible news. She was pregnant. I had never thought too much about having children so soon, but when she told me, something changed inside me. The idea of being a father excited me more than I ever imagined. I started working overtime to save more money, reading books about parenting, and even began to plan remodeling the apartment so the baby had its own room. However, the more I tried to build this perfect future, the more I noticed small changes in her behavior. At first, they were subtle things. She spent more time on her phone, smiled in a strange way when she received messages, and from time to time avoided looking me in the eyes. I wanted to think that it was the pregnancy hormones or maybe stress, but deep down something told me that something was not right. One night, when she fell asleep early, her phone started ringing with notifications. I'm usually not the type of person who checks other people's phones, but that time something pushed me to do it. The name of who was sending the messages was someone I knew, my best friend. At first, I thought that maybe he was sending her something about a surprise party for me or some idea for the baby shower since he was also close to both of us. But when I unlocked the phone, what I saw chilled me to the bone. They were messages between them. They were not only affectionate, but brazenly sexual. They talked about things they had done together, things that had nothing to do with me or my relationship. There were photos, some that I had never seen of her and that I knew were for him. A part of me wanted to vomit right there. My best friend, someone I knew since college, was having an affair with the woman who carried my child. My mind was blank, but something in me said that I couldn't act without more evidence. If I was going to do something about it, I needed to be completely sure of what was happening. So, for the following weeks, I dedicated myself to observing in silence. I made sure not to raise any suspicions. I checked her phone when I had the opportunity. I checked her movements, and everything pointed to the same thing. They were making me look like an idiot. Not only were they seeing each other in private, there were also indications that they had used my house for some of their meetings. Yes, while I worked long hours to assure our future family a good future, they were doing things in my own home. Every time I found another proof, my rage grew, but instead of exploding, I started to plan something. I knew that confronting them directly would be useless. They would deny everything, or worse, they would make everything seem like my fault. So, I decided that if they were going to play with me, I would return the blow, and it would not be something small. I wanted both of them to feel the weight of what they were doing to me. I needed to plan something impactful enough for them never to forget what they did. After that night when I discovered the messages, something inside me broke, but at the same time something woke up. I was not going to be the victim. I was not going to be that guy who simply lets things pass or who takes it as a blow of life. No, if they wanted to play with me, I was going to show them that they had chosen the wrong man to betray. From that moment, each day became an act. Each "I love you" that I told her, each caress, each smile were part of a role that I was playing. Inside I was furious, but I couldn't let her know. I needed time because what I was planning was not going to be something impulsive. This had to be calculated, meticulous, a revenge that hurt as much as their betrayal. First, I made sure to install a keylogger on her phone to capture everything she wrote and all the photos she received. It was easier than I thought since she was not particularly skilled with technology. In less than a week, I had everything I needed: complete conversations, intimate photos, even details about how they organized themselves to make me look like an idiot while they enjoyed. I discovered that they used to see each other on the days that I had long meetings or extended shifts at work. My best friend, or what was left of him in my head, even made jokes about how I worked hard to keep them comfortable. That was a direct blow to the soul. I don't know how I managed to maintain my composure after reading that, but I did. My plan needed patience. One night when she went out to visit a friend, I decided to test something. I pretended that I had fallen asleep early, but in reality, I stayed awake in the dark waiting. Using the remote access that I installed on her phone, I opened the camera secretly and confirmed what I already knew. They were together in the parking lot of a restaurant on the outskirts of the city, kissing in his car like two teenagers who couldn't wait. I sent those images to my email. Then I lay down in bed and tried to breathe deeply. My heart was beating so hard that I could hear it in my ears, but I had to calm down. Everything was part of the game. The next day, I started the next phase of my plan. I needed allies, but I didn't want anyone to suspect anything yet. So, I looked for her sister, someone who knew I had always been a little suspicious of my fiancé. We had never gotten along very well, but this time I pretended that I wanted to involve her more in our lives. I asked her for help organizing the baby shower, and she excitedly accepted. It wasn't just a strategy, it was an essential part of the plan. Then I went with her mother. I told her that I wanted to organize something special at the baby shower, something that would surprise everyone. Her mother was excited, obviously happy that I was so committed. What nobody knew was that I was planning something completely different. Meanwhile, I made sure not to raise any suspicions with my best friend. I even invited him to a barbecue at home one weekend so that nobody would suspect that something was wrong. During that barbecue, I made every effort to act as if I didn't know anything. The way he smiled and patted me on the back made me want to hit him. But I knew I couldn't ruin everything. Not yet. What infuriated me the most was how brazen they were. That afternoon while he was in the bathroom, I saw how she checked her phone to read a message that was clearly from him. I tried to look away, but I couldn't avoid feeling that the air around me was toxic. Everything was rotten. Finally, the day of the baby shower arrived. Her sister's house was decorated from top to bottom with balloons, lights, and banners that announced the arrival of the baby. I made sure to be attentive to my fiancé in front of everyone so that nobody could suspect what was coming. I had hired a professional photographer for the event, but what nobody knew was that I had also hired someone else, a sound and video technician. For weeks I had been editing a special video that I was going to show during the baby shower. The video began with a cheesy montage of photos of us, of our trips and happy moments. But then, well, we'll get to that. When everyone was gathered in the main room, I announced that I wanted to share something special with them, a small summary of our love and of this new chapter that we are going to begin together, I said with a smile that hurt me to feign. Applause filled the room while the technician put the video on the big screen that I had prepared. At first, the video was exactly what everyone expected, photos of us, soft music, small phrases about love and family. The women in the room sighed excitedly, and some of the men even applauded. But then the music changed suddenly. The screenshots of the messages between my fiancé and my best friend appeared on the screen. There was absolute silence in the room. The next image was a photo of them in the car kissing passionately. Someone dropped a glass of wine. The music had disappeared, leaving a deafening void. The silence in the room was so heavy that you could feel it in the air. Nobody knew what to say or how to react. My fiancé, who until that moment had been sitting at the main table smiling as if she were the queen of the day, suddenly turned pale. I literally saw her swallow saliva while her brain tried to process what she had just seen on the screen. My best friend was standing next to a group of friends in the corner of the room. As soon as he saw the images in the video, he started looking around like a mouse trapped in a trap looking for a way out. But there was no escape, not this time. Before anyone could say a word, I spoke with a calm tone that did not coincide with the chaos that was about to unleash. Excuse me, I said, pretending confusion. It seems that someone put the wrong photos. How strange, right? My fiancée rose from her chair abruptly, staggering a little. Her voice trembled while she tried to defend herself. What does this mean? Why are you showing those photos? This has to be a mistake. I raised an eyebrow, keeping my performance intact, and responded, a mistake? Well, that's what I thought at first when I found the messages and the photos, that maybe someone was trying to sabotage us. But then when collecting more evidence, I realized that it was not a mistake, is it? The tension in the room was unbearable. Some people started to whisper among them, while others simply watched in a state of shock. I decided not to stop. I had planned this for weeks, and I was not going to allow them to get out of this without facing what they had done. In fact, I don't want anyone here to think that I'm crazy or that I'm making things up, so I prepared something else. I announced, signaling the technician to continue the video. On the screen appeared a recording of the most explicit conversations between them, text messages, audios in which they planned to meet while I was working, and even a clip where my fiancée talked about how she was playing me to get everything she wanted before things got complicated with the baby. The faces of the guests went from surprise to pure disgust. I could hear someone murmur, "How disgusting." My fiancée tried to move toward the screen as if she could stop the inevitable, but I stopped her, raising a hand. "Don't even try it," I said coldly. "This is not your day to speak." She looked at me with her eyes full of tears, but they were not tears of regret. They were tears of someone who knew that she had been caught. "It's not what it seems," she shouted, trying to defend herself again. "Oh, please," I responded, my tone now full of sarcasm. "Do you want me to explain what it seems? Because to me it seems that while I worked late to build a future for you and for our baby, you were playing on two bands with him." I pointed directly to my supposed best friend, who until that moment had remained silent. Everyone turned their heads towards him. His face was red, and he tried to speak. "Look, bro, I can explain it. This is not what you think." I laughed in his face. "Oh no? Then explain to me how your tongue ended up in her mouth, or how do you justify the photos of you in my car parked in front of my house? Come on, enlighten me." The room exploded in whispers. Some people clearly wanted to leave, but they were too hooked to do it. It was like a car accident, horrible to see, but impossible to ignore. Then I took out my last ace up my sleeve. "But don't worry, this is not all, because the funniest thing is that while all this was happening, I was busy making sure that the world knew what you are." I took out my phone and connected another file to the projector. It was an email that I had sent that same day to several people, mutual friends, family, even their coworkers, all with the attached evidence. And of course, I tagged their companies in the subject in case anyone was interested in knowing what kind of professionals they had on their team. It was at that moment that my best friend lost his composure. He launched himself towards me, shouting something unintelligible, but one of the guests stopped him before he could get too far. "Do you dare to attack me after everything you did?" I shouted at him, now letting out all the rage that I had contained. "You are a traitor. You stabbed me in the back in the worst way possible, and you still think you can stand here and shout at me as if you were the victim? Go to hell." My fiancée, meanwhile, was crying as if she were the victim of a Greek tragedy. She tried to approach me, but I backed away. "Don't touch me," I warned her. "You no longer have the right to anything that I am. You ended that when you decided to sleep with him." The sister of my fiancée stood up, then visibly furious, and shouted at her own sister, "I can't believe what you did. You are a disgrace. How could you betray someone who clearly loves you?" The next thing I knew was that the sister was shouting at the guests to leave, that the party was over. I didn't care. In fact, I felt incredibly relieved to see how everything that they had built was crumbling in front of them. That night, both tried to contact me. My fiancée sent me messages begging me to forgive her, saying that she had done it out of confusion and that everything would change. My best friend sent me an email full of stupid excuses. I didn't respond to any of them. After that explosive night of the baby shower, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. On one hand, I was satisfied. I had exposed their betrayal in front of everyone, and that was just the beginning of my revenge. But on the other hand, there was still a latent fury inside me, a desire to make them fully understand the consequences of what they had done. What infuriated me the most was the audacity of both. Despite the public humiliation, they continued trying to justify their actions as if I was an idiot. The day after the event, I decided to put in motion the next phase of my plan. It wasn't just about emotional revenge. I wanted them to also feel the impact on their personal and professional lives. If they thought they could move on as if nothing had happened, they were very wrong. I knew exactly where to hit my best friend. We both worked in the same industry, although in different companies. He had a strict policy of ethics and personal conduct, especially for those in leadership positions like him. With the evidence that I had, the photos, the messages, and the videos, I drafted a detailed email addressed to the human resources department of his company. I didn't limit myself to sending only evidence. I also included a clear summary of how his behavior had affected my personal and professional life, highlighting how he had used our personal connections to manipulate and betray me. I sent it with a mixture of satisfaction and anxiety. I didn't know how long they would take to respond, but it was enough to imagine his reaction when he received the news. A couple of days later, I received the confirmation. My friend had been fired. Apparently, the company did not take lightly the fact that he had used his position to take advantage of someone else in his social circle. The most ironic thing is that he had been fired just the day he was supposed to present an important project for the company. I ruined him in the same way that he ruined my life. As for my ex-fiancée, I knew that her greatest fear was that her family would reject her. Although I had already humiliated her in front of her sister and her friends, I wanted to make sure that she could never rebuild her reputation. So, I prepared a package containing everything: screenshots of the messages, the photos, and a summary of her relationship with my friend. I sent it directly to her parents. A couple of days later, I received a message from her mother. It was short but forceful. "I can't believe you went through this. She has disappointed us in the worst way. I'm so sorry." I didn't respond, but I knew that my message had been received. If that wasn't bad enough, her mother, who was very active in her church, also shared the story with other members of the community. Her reputation was shattered. I knew that her life would not stop completely with just those actions. After all, people can recover over time, and that wasn't enough for me. So, I took my plan one step further. I hired a private investigator. Yes, it was expensive, but worth every penny. My goal was to expose any other secret or lie they were hiding. I didn't care if it was something related to them, their finances, or even their past life. I wanted them to feel that they had no place to hide. The investigator soon found something interesting. My ex-fiancée had accumulated debts that she had never mentioned to me, and apparently, she had been using my money to pay them while pretending to save for the baby. Also, my friend was facing legal problems for something related to an inappropriate relationship in the past. I decided not to take immediate action with this information. Instead, I saved it to use it at the perfect moment. A couple of weeks after the baby shower, I decided that it was time to deliver the final blow. I had been editing a video with all the evidence: the messages, the photos, the audios, and even fragments of what happened at the baby shower. It was a summary of all the betrayal. I decided to share it on social media, but with a strategic approach. I posted it anonymously, making sure to tag some of the people who were at the party as well as others that I knew had an interest in the drama. The video went viral within our social circle. The comments were a mixture of amazement, support, and in some cases pure indignation towards them. Nobody could believe the magnitude of what they had done, and even less how I had handled it. Some said that I was cruel, but most agreed that they deserved what happened to them. My friend ended up being rejected even by his own group of friends, and his partner with whom he had been dating before this left him immediately. My ex-fiancée also faced a level of social ostracism that not even she could withstand. She tried to move to another city, but her reputation was already tarnished. After everything came to light, I finally felt that I could breathe. I moved out of the city, leaving behind the memories and the toxicity. I rented a small apartment in a quiet place and began to focus on myself. For the first time in months, I was able to sleep without feeling that I had a knot in my stomach. The most important thing was to realize that I didn't need their validation or anyone's. Despite how difficult it was, I learned that my value doesn't depend on how others treat me. They betrayed me, yes, but in the end, their downfall was the result of their own actions. I only made sure that they faced the consequences. With the public humiliation of both, I thought that I had finally finished with that stage of my life. I had made sure that both my ex-fiancée and my best friend felt the weight of their betrayals, and although I couldn't erase what they did, at least I felt that I had regained some control. But as I learned, life is rarely so simple. Although everything seemed to have ended, I still felt a whirlwind of emotions. Don't misunderstand me. I didn't regret for a second what I did, but at the same time, there was a void in me. I had dedicated weeks, even months, to planning how to destroy them, and now that I had achieved it, I wondered, and now what? That feeling of emptiness followed me for weeks. Although I had moved to another city and was starting over, there were days in which it was difficult for me to get out of bed. I realized that although I had won this battle, I was still carrying the pain of the betrayal. I decided to seek professional help. It was one of the most difficult decisions I have ever made because I always thought that I could handle everything on my own. But after some sessions with a therapist, I began to understand that my revenge, although satisfactory, was not going to heal the deep wounds that they had left. While I was working on my recovery, they continued facing the consequences of their actions. My ex-fiancée tried to rebuild her life in another city. According to what I heard from people who were still connected with her, she had found a modest job and lived alone. Her family was still distant from her, and although she tried to reconcile with them, she didn't seem to have much success. As for my best friend, his downfall was even more severe. After being fired, he faced legal problems related to his history. I don't have specific details, but his reputation was ruined, and any professional opportunity he may have had was crushed. The last thing I knew about him was that he was living with a relative trying to stay afloat. The curious thing is that both of them tried to contact me several times even after everything that had happened. My ex-fiancée sent me a long email a couple of months after the baby shower saying that she had changed, that she deeply regretted it, and that she still loved me. She even offered to return all the money I had spent on her, as if that was enough to erase what she did. I didn't respond. I simply had nothing more to say to her. My friend also tried to reach me, but in his case, his messages were more of anger. He blamed me for ruining his life, saying that I had been excessive in my revenge. How ironic, isn't it? The man who betrayed my trust more deeply than anyone now accused me of being unfair. I blocked his number without thinking twice. One of the most difficult aspects of all this was to repair the important relationships in my life that had been affected by the betrayal. My mother, for example, had been very worried about me during this whole process. Although I tried to protect her from the ugliest details, I knew that she had suffered seeing me so devastated. The good news is that my mother, being the strong woman that she is, did not allow this experience to destroy her. Little by little, she began to feel stronger and support me in ways that I didn't even know I needed. We got much closer, and eventually she moved in with me for a while, which helped both of us to heal. As for my circle of friends, not everyone stayed. Some took a neutral stance during the whole situation, which honestly hurt me, but I also discovered who were really there for me. Some close friends made sure to remind me constantly of my value, and that was something that I will never forget. Over time, I began to rebuild my life. I decided to focus on my career and on things that I had always wanted to do but had postponed. I started to travel, to explore new hobbies, and to invest more time in myself. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again, and then in the most unexpected way, I met someone new. It wasn't something planned or sought after. We met on a business trip in Denver, and from the beginning, I felt a genuine connection. She was kind, honest, and had a positive energy that contrasted completely with everything I had experienced before. It wasn't easy to open up again, but she was patient with me, and that made all the difference. Today we are building something together, and although I still have my moments of doubt, I know that this time I am with someone who is really worth it. Story 4. My sister cheated with my fiancé on our engagement night, and my family supported her. 5 years later, she's bankrupt and begging me for a $7,000 loan. My name is Amelia, 27F, and until a few years ago, I thought my life was more or less normal. At least, my dramas were the typical ones of university, work, and friendships. I grew up in a suburb near Chicago in the state of Illinois, and my family seemed united. I say seemed because as the eldest daughter, I always tried to be the example. Good grades, avoiding problems, trying to collaborate with my parents in everything. I have a younger sister, Emma, 25F, with whom I shared a room, secrets, joys when we were children. In short, a relationship that I believed unbreakable. I met Oliver, 28M, in a volunteering program I did during my second year of university. He was helping to organize a fundraising event in a community in Minneapolis, and we got to work on the same team. Since then, there was chemistry. We started dating, and after graduating, I moved to his city for a while. Although eventually we returned to Chicago to be close to my family. After 4 years of dating, he proposed engagement. It was a dream moment. He took me to a restaurant overlooking the lake with soft music and took out the ring. Everything pointed to us being together forever. My sister Emma always showed herself to be very close to Oliver, almost too much for my taste, but I never thought it was something weird because she is quite extroverted by nature. Also, shortly before the proposal, I had begun to notice uncomfortable situations, glances between them, somewhat strange comments from her. "Oh, Oliver looks so handsome in that shirt. How lucky you are, Amelia." Still, I told myself that I was being paranoid. The night of our engagement, my parents organized a small party at home. They invited some close friends, family, and neighbors. The idea was to celebrate the "yes, I do" in an intimate way and share a pleasant time. I remember that everything was beautiful. Warm lights in the patio, quiet music, delicious appetizers. Oliver and I seemed like the perfect couple, receiving congratulations everywhere. People were having fun. I felt like the happiest woman on the planet, and my parents were proud to announce that there would be a wedding. During the celebration, I excused myself for a moment to answer a call from a coworker. Nothing important, but I went to a corner of the garden looking for a little silence to be able to hear her well. Afterwards, I decided to return to the living room to continue with the party. When I peeked through a side door, I saw something that to this day I can't get out of my head: my sister Emma kissing Oliver. But it was not a friendly kiss or an oversight. They were kissing with a passion that left me in shock, as if no one else existed. At first, I thought that I had drunk too much and my imagination was playing a trick on me. But no, there they were with their hands intertwined and their bodies stuck together. I was so stunned that I dropped my cell phone, and there was a strange silence as if everything had gone off in my head. I don't remember if I screamed, cried, or simply stayed watching. What I do remember is that Emma and Oliver saw me there petrified. Neither said anything at first. Emma, with her eyes full of panic, looked away, and Oliver took a step back. It was an eternal second, and without thinking twice, I turned around and left the house without grabbing my bag. I got in my car and drove aimlessly for a long time. I was devastated. It was my sister and my fiancé on our engagement night. That night, I stayed in a roadside motel on the outskirts of Chicago. I turned off the cell phone because it wouldn't stop ringing. The next day, with my mind a little more in order, I read messages from my sister and Oliver. Messages that said, "We need to talk. I'm sorry, this shouldn't have happened. I didn't want to hurt you," etc. But I also noticed something more disturbing: messages from my own parents telling me to talk to Emma and that I shouldn't exaggerate the situation. I had a mixture of rage and pain that prevented me from returning to that house. How were they not going to understand what they had done to me? My sister, with whom I shared almost all my life, had just betrayed me with the person I thought would be my partner forever, and my parents, instead of defending my pain, were trying to get me not to exaggerate. I felt alone, defenseless, and betrayed. I was in that motel all weekend ignoring calls and messages from almost everyone. I only wrote to my best friend Lily, 27F, so she knew where I was for security. She gave me her unconditional support and encouraged me to go get my things and end the relationship since that clearly had no turning back. But I didn't want to face anyone yet. It was a long weekend full of tears. When I finally mustered the courage to return to my parents' house, I was greeted by a very strange panorama. Upon entering, I found Oliver, Emma, and my parents in the living room as if they were waiting for me. My Aunt Pauline, 60F, who lives with my parents since a couple of years because she was widowed and had no other place to go, was also there. As soon as I crossed the door, everyone began to speak at the same time as if they had been rehearsing what they were going to say for hours. Oliver approached me first and told me that we needed to talk alone, but I couldn't even look at him. I tried to dodge him and said that I was only coming to collect my belongings. That's when Emma took a step forward with teary eyes and blurted out something that left me frozen. "Amelia, I'm really sorry. Oliver and I didn't want it to happen like this, but we're in love. Please forgive me." My father intervened, trying to sound conciliatory. "Daughter, I know it was a hard blow, but things happen. You can't force love. If your sister and Oliver feel something real, we must accept it." I listened to him, and I thought that something in the universe had broken. Was I the villain of this story? My mother, instead of giving me a hug, blurted out a similar speech. "Honey, it's not ideal, we know, but it doesn't make sense for you to turn it into such a big drama. You can all get along well in the family." Family? What family were they talking about? They had just destroyed my trust, my relationship, my wedding plans. I felt so much rage and impotence that I remained motionless in silence looking at each one. Emma next to Oliver holding his hand, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. My parents asking me to come to reason, to be mature, and to accept that life is like that. I wanted to scream, but I contained myself. With a trembling voice, I told them that I couldn't accept that relationship, much less celebrate it. I demanded that they all leave the house or leave me alone to pack my things. It was Oliver who with supposedly kind tones said, "You don't have to go, Amelia. We'll leave. I have decided to go live with Emma since everything was discovered. We believe it's better that you stay." As if he were making a sacrifice by leaving me my parents' house. My mother and my father had a tense smile, as if secretly approving that idea of Oliver staying with Emma. Someone tried to hug me. I don't remember if it was my mother or my Aunt Pauline. but I stepped back. Don't touch me. You knew or not. It doesn't matter. You have betrayed me. My parents said that I shouldn't be dramatic, that it was time to be practical. They were asking me to be happy for my sister, to understand her. My father even blurted out the phrase, "Daughter, you are an adult. You know that love can't be commanded. You have to overcome it." That was the last straw. I shouted at them that it was a shame that they defended that clandestine relationship. Without saying more, I went upstairs, picked up several of my things, and left through the door without saying goodbye. No one even bothered to stop me. Well, Oliver made a move to follow me, but Emma grabbed his wrist, and he stayed there. I suppose they felt somewhat guilty, but not enough to retract. I drove straight to my friend Lily's apartment. She opened the door, and as soon as she saw me, I burst into tears. I felt that my world had collapsed in a matter of days. Not only had I lost my fiancé, but also the trust in my family. Lily prepared me a tea, let me release all my rancor, and offered me to stay with her as long as I needed. She even suggested seeking psychological help to cease what happened. That night, I had the worst nightmare. I saw my sister and Oliver getting married, and my family applauding while I was locked in a dark room. In the following days, my phone exploded with messages and calls. My mother demanding that I talk to her, my father saying that I shouldn't be childish, Emma apologizing, Oliver telling me that this wasn't easy for him either. I read those messages, and each time my chest burned more. Also, Oliver's family wrote to me blaming themselves and admitting that they felt very bad about what happened but didn't know how to intervene. Weeks later, I received a wedding invitation. Yes, you read that right. Emma and Oliver were going to get married. I thought it was a macabre joke, but the card was real with their photo and the date. My parents obviously expected me to attend. The impudence was incredible. I decided to ignore them all and moved on with my life. I changed my cell phone number and moved to an apartment with Lily. I invested time in my work, and I met new people. It was hard, but little by little, I tried to rebuild my dignity and self-esteem. However, my family didn't give up so quickly and kept appearing in social networks and calls until one day I simply decided to block them all. For years, I didn't set foot in my parents' house again. I freed myself from all that drama, or at least so I thought. 5 years had passed since that episode that shattered my life as I knew it. The pain didn't disappear overnight, but I did everything possible to rebuild myself away from that toxic family environment. I concentrated on my work. I was promoted in the digital marketing company where I work, and with patience, I saved enough money to move to an apartment in Boston, Massachusetts, a city that had always attracted me for its historical air and its cosmopolitan atmosphere. It wasn't easy to leave Chicago, but it was necessary to cut ties with those memories and, by the way, expand my professional opportunities. Throughout this time, I completely ignored my family. I blocked my sister Emma and my ex Oliver on networks so as not to see anything of their lives. With my parents, at first, I was more flexible. I had them silenced, but not blocked. However, every time their notifications appeared, I ended up with a bitter feeling of guilt and rage at the same time. Why did my family betray me in that way and then pretend that I acted normally? I asked myself again and again. In these 5 years, I dedicated myself to taking care of myself. I did therapy a couple of times a week, and I met a guy, Lucas, 30M, a friend of my roommate in Boston who was becoming someone special for me. There was no rush. I learned to go slow in relationships. Still, the shadows of the past appeared from time to time, reminding me that I shouldn't trust so easily. Lucas was understanding. He never pressured me to talk about my family trauma, and he gave me space which I greatly appreciated. Everything was going on in relative calm until one morning I received a call from an unknown number. Normally, I don't answer numbers that I don't recognize, but I was waiting for the confirmation of a new work contract. I thought it would be something related to my job, so I answered. To my surprise, on the other side was my mother. I was about to hang up, but she moaned my name with such desperation that I couldn't help but keep listening. "Amelia, please don't hang up. I know I don't deserve a word from you, but I beg you, it's urgent." I remained silent for a couple of seconds with a knot in my throat. My mother sounded afflicted, almost unrecognizable. I felt weak for not hanging up, but I couldn't do it. So, I gave her 5 minutes to explain what was happening. "Amelia, your sister is going through hell. They are about to lose the house. The business failed. They went into debt, and now they have a lot of creditors chasing them. We don't know what to do. Suddenly my mind was filled with questions. What business? What is she talking about? What house are they losing? But above all, I was struck by the way my mother used that, your sister. She referred to Emma as if it were normal for me to run to help her. It was surreal. I'm sorry, Mom, but I don't see why you're telling me this. Daughter, Oliver and Emma set up an event organization company a couple of years ago. At first, it seemed to be going well, but then they had many expenses and they couldn't get serious investors. They went into debt up to their necks. They sold almost everything. They are on the verge of bankruptcy. They are going to lose even the house they live in. The creditors, the interests, it's crazy. I felt a pang in my chest, half for compassion and half for rage. They were calling me only because they needed an economic rescue. Yes, that was it. My mother confirmed it 2 seconds later. They need $7,000 to pay off the urgent debts, and they don't know who to turn to. Your father and I can't ask for such a big loan. Emma and Oliver don't qualify for more credits either because they have a terrible history. I thought that maybe you, well, I know you have a good job and that you could. I didn't let her finish. Are you serious, Mom? Do you think I'm going to help the people who betrayed me in the cruelest way? My mother began to sob. Please, Amelia, they are your sister and your ex. Yes, but deep down they are still family. We can't let them fall like that. Don't you have a minimum of affection towards us? I closed my eyes, trying not to lose my calm. After a silence, I answered with a trembling voice. And where was the family affection when your other daughter and my fiancé cheated on me in my own house on my engagement night? When you demanded that I celebrate their love? Don't make me laugh. You didn't lift a finger for me, and now you call me asking for help. My mother continued crying, saying things like, it's that I didn't think they would get to this extreme. Oliver and Emma were very irresponsible, but after all, they are part of us. It was hurtful that they weren't even capable of apologizing for the past. They only focused on the dramatic present of Emma and Oliver. I told her clearly that I wouldn't give them a penny, that I might have considered a human gesture if at least they had acknowledged their mistake and had asked me for forgiveness with sincerity years ago. But no, they decided to expel me emotionally, and now that they were in trouble, they remembered me? No, that's not done. I beg you to think about it. My mother whispered before hanging up, knowing that she would get nothing more from me. I stayed looking at the mobile as if I expected another surprise call to come out, maybe from my father or worse from Emma, but nothing happened. At that moment, my heart was beating wildly. I called Lily, who continued being my great support despite the distance. She is still in Chicago, but we talk daily. I told her what had happened, and Lily repeated to me what my therapist and other friends have told me for years. You don't owe them anything, much less money. You are not their bank. After what they did to you, it's absurd that they asked for help. Still, a part of me was restless. I don't like the idea of seeing my parents dragged into the suffering that maybe the bankruptcy of Emma and Oliver will cause. But I am neither their savior nor their walking wallet. A few days later, desperate messages from my mother began to arrive, telling me that Emma was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, that the lenders were harassing her, that Oliver was depressed, and that they were thinking of selling all their possessions to be able to subsist. I didn't respond. It hurt me to read so much misery, but I couldn't find a single reason to get involved. Also, it seemed very cheeky that Emma didn't contact me directly, but used my mother as an intermediary. Is it that even in her ruin, she is not capable of swallowing her pride and asking me for apologies? I wondered indignantly. Each day I opened my mailbox or my phone waiting for new pleas. However, what I never thought was that Emma and Oliver would dare to appear in my new city knocking on my door. That afternoon I will never forget. It was cold in Boston with a persistent drizzle since the morning. I had returned early from work loaded with documents and thinking of preparing myself a tea to relax when I heard some loud knocks on my door. When I peeked through the peephole, I felt that my heart gave a jump impossible. Emma, my sister, and Oliver, my ex, were there soaked by the drizzle with tense and disfigured faces. I had no idea how they had obtained my address. I felt panic, rage, and surprise. My first impulse was to pretend that I wasn't home, but the knocks didn't cease, and they began to shout my name. Amelia, we know you're there. Don't ignore us. My neighbor Henry, 40M, went out to the hallway to see what was happening and asked them to stop shouting that they were bothering the whole floor. Emma and Oliver didn't even apologize. Somehow it seemed that nothing mattered to them at that moment except talking to me. Finally, with trembling hands, I opened the door barely a couple of centimeters using the security chain. "What are you doing here? How did you get my address?" I blurted out, my voice trembling with contained rage. Emma hurried to speak. "Mom gave it to us, Amelia. We know it's not the best, but we need you. We have to talk, please." I observed Oliver, who didn't dare even to look me in the eyes. He seemed lost, as if he didn't know what to say. I decided that I wasn't going to let them enter my personal space. So, with the door ajar, I told them that we had nothing to talk about and that if they didn't leave, I would call the police. That's when Oliver raised his voice. "We need you to lend us the money, Amelia. Please, we ask you. You don't know in what situation we are." His plea sounded desperate, but there was also a nuance of demand, as if I had the obligation to save them. I was invaded by a feeling of incredulity. Really, after everything, they thought that I could give them such a big sum of altruistically? Incredible. I wanted to slam the door in their face, but Emma put her hand and pushed it, trying to force the chain. "We know that this is hard. I know we hurt you, but listen to us, please. It's not just about us, it's the family. Dad and Mom are also suffering seeing us like this." My neighbor Henry approached and asked me if I needed help. I asked him nervously to call the police if the situation became aggressive. Emma realized it and lowered her voice, begging me with her eyes wet. "Amelia, look, we're not asking you to give us the money. We'll pay it back, I swear. But please don't leave us like this. We're going to lose everything. Are you going to allow your family to be on the street?" I gritted my teeth. My family, I thought. I had been emotionally kicked out of that family the night I found out about their cheating, and my sister and my fiancé had stayed with my life, my home, and the support of my parents. 4 or 5 years, not a word of genuine regret. Only taunts and excuses, as if it had been me who wanted to break the harmony. "You had 5 years to approach and ask me for sincere apologies, Emma. 5 long years in which you ignored me. And now that you're sunk, you come to beg for my help. Do you know how humiliating everything was for me? What I suffered while everyone celebrated your relationship with Oliver." She whimpered something like, "I'm sorry," but it sounded more like a desperate formula than a true repentance. Oliver, for his part, approached with a notebook in hand. "Look, here we have a plan. I would return the money at a reasonable interest, even with a contract, but please give us this opportunity. You can save us." I was surprised by the ease with which he spoke of a contract when there was not the slightest glimmer of trust. Then I realized something. They were in a mode of pure survival. It was not about "forgive me," "I love you," or "I really want to reconcile." They were trying whatever so that I, the person they destroyed, would extend an economic lifeline, and honestly, I didn't feel even the most remote desire to do it. "No. The answer is no. If you don't leave, I'll call the police." Oliver shouted with his nerves on edge. "Do you think you're going to leave us in ruin? To your own sister? To someone you loved at some point? This is inhuman." My blood boiled. I pushed the door, trying to close it completely. Emma, seeing my reaction, began to cry with more intensity, throwing accusations at me. "You can't be so cruel. We know you have savings, that you're doing well. Why are you so selfish?" It was the last straw. I slammed the door forcefully, and I managed to close it despite her putting her hand in a couple of times. Immediately, I put the lock and lowered the bar. Through the peephole, I saw that they stayed there, banging on the door, shouting at me to listen to them. I leaned back, and I felt dizzy with my heart hammering in my temples. My neighbor Henry was calling the police. In a matter of minutes, 2 agents appeared who went up, warned by the doorman of the building. Emma and Oliver were no longer shouting, but they had sat in the hallway, refusing to leave. They began to argue with the agents, arguing that they only wanted to talk to their sister. The officers asked them to identify themselves, and they explained that if the resident didn't want to receive them, they should leave or they would be evicted by force. Emma looked at me for the last time with eyes full of rage and pity, and she left, dragging Oliver. Not a goodbye, not a sincere forgiveness, nothing. The rest of the afternoon, I was shocked. I thought of my parents and that surely they were behind that play to force a reunion. I felt a kind of moral nausea and also relief, at least they were no longer at my door. But that's not where it ended. After a couple of hours, I received on my phone another unknown number, a very long text message from my mother. It said that she had heard how I kicked out Emma and Oliver and how I allowed the police to intervene. She called me ungrateful for not helping the family in a moment of urgency and repeated that when this storm passes, I would regret having turned my back on them. She accused me of immaturity and of not knowing how to forgive. That was too much. I realized that I would never obtain peace while I continued having a minimum channel of communication open with them. So, I blocked that number too. Not to feel guilt, I wrote a small note in my diary. I don't owe them anything. They destroyed me. They humiliated me. They ignored me. I deserve my tranquility. I'm not their wallet. I'm not their savior. That night, I talked to Lucas, my new partner, telling him point by point what had just happened. He offered to spend the night with me, worried about my security. I told him that I was fine, that I had neighbors willing to help in case of need, and I was glad that he didn't pressure me more. Still, we agreed to see each other the next day in case I needed emotional support. The next day, I went to work feeling lighter. My parents didn't call me again. Emma and Oliver didn't give signs of life. Sometimes I think that my mother plans to reappear at any moment with a different drama, but I no longer care. I have learned to be firm in my limits. Nobody, not even your own blood, has the right to run over your dignity and then demand favors from you. Ironically, the reappearance of Emma and Oliver gave me closure to something that I had been years without processing completely. Now I know that I freed myself from that absurd guilt that made me think. And if I am the bad daughter for not talking to them? No, I am not. I was simply protecting myself. What will happen with Emma and Oliver? Maybe they will sell their furniture. Maybe they will end up in a more modest housing, or who knows, they will go to another city to start over. It's not my problem. I know that my parents, from what I understand, are suffering the economic collapse that their daughter and son-in-law provoked, but they should have thought about it before taking their side when I needed them the most. Story 5. At family dinner, Mom told me to sell my apartment to pay off my sister's debt. When I refused, she called me incredibly selfish. The next morning, I woke up to 57 missed calls. My name is Logan. I'm 29, I work in tech, and I own my own apartment. Nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom place I worked my butt off to afford. I like my life the way it is, quiet, stable, and mine. And maybe that's why my parents and my sister, Emily, think I should give it up. My mom's text came while I was at work. Mom, your sister is in serious trouble. You have to do your part and sell your apartment. I stared at the screen, rereading it, and then replied with a single word, no. 10 seconds later, my phone buzzed. Are you serious? Not even a hello? She's your sister, and she's drowning in debt. Silence, then a sharp sigh. Logan, you're being incredibly selfish right now. There it was, the magic word, selfish. They use it every time they want something from me. When have they ever helped me? I paused. I should have said no to going that night. But I knew if I didn't, they'd pester me for weeks. Flashback. 5 years ago, it was my first real job, barely paying enough to cover rent. Emily had just moved back home after quitting her marketing job to find herself. Mom called me one night, voice thick with worry. Mom, honey, Emily's having a hard time. She can't even afford gas. Could you send her something to get back on her feet? I had $300 in my account, and rent was due in 4 days. Still, I sent her $200. The next day, she posted an Instagram story showing off her new manicure, a caramel macchiato, and the phrase self-care day. When I asked her about it, she laughed. It's just money, Logan, relax. It was the first time I realized that Emily and I lived in two different worlds. Present, I arrived at my parents' house. Emily was already sitting in the fragile victim role, teacup in hand, eyes red like she'd just returned from the front lines. Dad cleared his throat, carefully setting down his fork. We need to talk about your apartment. Emily is in a very difficult situation because she spent money she didn't have. She needed to maintain a certain lifestyle to work. You don't have a job, I said. Mom shot me a warning look. Logan, she needs your help. And I need you to stop treating me like an ATM. Dad exhaled through his nose. It's just an apartment. You can buy another one. You want me to sell my home so Emily can pay off her debt? It's not just about that, Mom said, her voice strained. It's about family. We help each other. I pushed back from the table, almost knocking over my chair. And yet I'm the only one with an apartment? I muttered. Shame on you. I stood, grabbing my coat. You raised the only sensible person in this family, and I left. The text started before I even reached my car. Mom, you've disappointed us. Dad, call your mother right now. Emily, are you really doing this after everything I've been through? I silenced my phone, got in my car, and drove home, because I knew this was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls, 10 from Mom, 4 from Dad, and 3 from Emily. I sighed, rolled over, and checked the texts. Mom, we need to talk. Dad, call your mother right now. Emily, are you really doing this? After everything I've been through. I sat up and rubbed my face, knowing exactly what was coming. 3 years ago, Emily had just returned from a spiritual retreat in Bali. She spent her savings on overpriced yoga classes and Instagrammable smoothies. A week later, Mom called. Mom, honey, your sister is in a bit of a bind. I knew where this was going. Just a few thousand to cover rent until she finds a job. I was making $50,000 a year, barely surviving in my tiny apartment, while Emily had spent a month finding herself in a tropical paradise. Logan, she's your sister, and I'm not her retirement plan. The next day, Emily posted a picture at a fancy restaurant with the caption, "Never asked where you got the money." Present, I want to make coffee. The phone kept buzzing relentlessly. I finally answered. Logan, Mom's voice boomed in my ear. I held the phone away. Do you understand what you did to your sister? By not giving her free money, you humiliated her. She's been crying all night. Again, I didn't put her in debt. She did that herself. She's suffering. Then let her suffer. Maybe she'll learn something. Then I hope you can live with yourself. I set the phone on the counter and exhaled. 5 minutes later, a text from my dad. Come over tonight. I knew what that meant. They weren't done pressuring me yet. I should have known this wouldn't be a simple conversation. The moment I stepped into my parents' house, I felt it. The tension in the air, Mom pacing back and forth, Dad sitting with his arms crossed, ready to lay down the law. And then I saw her, Emily, sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket like a tragic victim, her eyes red and puffy as if she'd been crying for hours. Nothing had changed. I almost turned around and left. Sit down, Dad said, his voice stern and serious. There's no need. I already know where this is going. Sit down and listen to us, Mom insisted, her arms crossed. I sighed and sat. Not because I wanted to, but because I knew if I didn't, they'd complain that I never gave them a chance to explain. Logan, we just don't understand why you're being so heartless. Heartless? For not wanting to sell my home? It's my apartment, Mom, the one I worked my ass off to afford. And your sister is about to lose everything, she countered, while Emily dramatically dabbed at her tears, as if she were in a soap opera. You don't understand what it's like to be in my shoes, Emily murmured, her voice trembling just enough to sound vulnerable. The atmosphere in my parents' house was thick. I knew it the instant I walked through the door. Mom was pacing back and forth, arms crossed, muttering something to herself. Dad was sitting at the table, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the tablecloth as if trying to burn a hole through it. And Emily was wrapped in a blanket, eyes red and puffy like she'd been crying all night. Sit down, Dad commanded, using his most serious tone. I stared at him, weighing whether or not to obey. If I stayed standing, they'd say I wasn't willing to listen. If I sat, it meant I was playing their game. I sighed and dropped into a chair. There's no need for all this drama, I said, crossing my arms. I already know where this is going. Then explain to me why you're acting like this, Mom interjected, her voice trembling. Acting like what? Like we're strangers, like our family means nothing to you. There it was, the emotional blackmail, always the same. Family means a lot to me, I retorted, just struggling. Emily sobbed at that exact moment, as if my words had pierced her. You don't understand what it's like to be in my place, she whispered, her voice breaking. You're right, I admitted. I don't understand what it's like to be in your place, because I've never allowed myself to get to this point. The silence that followed was heavy. Mom looked at me with a mixture of disappointment and anger, and Dad clenched his fists on the table. Son, are you really going to stand by while your sister suffers? I leaned back in my chair. Define suffering. Because last time I checked, Emily had a new iPhone and was dining out at fancy restaurants. It's not that simple, she burst out, her eyes flashing with indignation. You can't reduce everything to material things. No, of course not, I retorted. When things get tough, you always find someone to pick up the bill for you. Mom let out a shaky breath. We're not asking you to do it for nothing, Dad tried to reason. Just sell your apartment. Give us the money, and when we recover, we'll help you get another one. Oh, sure, I let out a dry laugh. Because you've been so good at returning what I lend you, right? Emily stood up abruptly, her face contorted with rage. How can you be so cruel? I'm your sister. And what exactly does that mean? That I'm obligated to sacrifice everything I have to save you from your own bad decisions. They're not bad decisions, it's life, she blurted out, as if she were the victim of an unfair fate. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, how difficult it is. Emily, what you call pressure most people call responsibility. She glared at me and stormed out of the room, her footsteps exaggerated. Mom followed her, calling her name anxiously, and Dad remained at the table, watching me with a hard look. You've disappointed us, Logan. I stood up, grabbing my coat. That says a lot more about you than it does about me. And I left. Barely a few hours had passed since I left my parents' house when my phone began to vibrate incessantly. First came calls from Mom, which I ignored without a second thought. Then, long, dramatic messages telling me that Emily was devastated, that she hadn't stopped crying, that maybe she had made a mistake by pressuring me too much. The last message caught my attention more than the others. Mom, we can't find Emily. She's gone, and she's not answering her phone. I'm scared, Logan. Tell me you're satisfied. I stared at the screen, frowning. I knew Emily was capable of a lot of things, but disappearing after our argument, that was new. I decided not to respond. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew the pattern. It was a cycle. First the attack, then the guilt, then the dramatic disappearance, and finally, the triumphant return with the family completely on her side. I wasn't going to fall for that. But the next day, when I woke up, I had more than 30 missed calls. Mom, Dad, even some unknown numbers, probably distant relatives who had suddenly decided to get involved in our lives. When I unlocked my phone, the first message I saw was from my mother. Mom, Emily showed up. Don't bother asking how she is. It's obvious you don't care anymore. There it was, confirmation that it had all been an act. I sighed, made myself a coffee, and decided it was best to go about my day as if nothing had happened. But it wasn't that easy. At work, my boss called me into his office. When I entered, he was frowning, phone in hand. Logan, is everything all right at home? I immediately tensed. Why do you ask? We received an anonymous call this morning. Someone said you were going through personal problems and might need some time off. I remained silent, trying to process what I had just heard. An anonymous call? Yes, they didn't mention their name, but they said they were from your family. I closed my eyes for a second and took a deep breath. I'm fine, I said, not bothering to hide my irritation. I don't need any time off. All right, my boss agreed, without pressing the issue. But if you ever need to talk, my door is open. I left his office with a knot in my stomach. My family had just crossed a new line. Now they weren't just trying to manipulate me emotionally, they were trying to affect my professional life. This wasn't just a family conflict anymore, it was war. The problem with cutting off communication with my family was that they never accepted it without a fight. First, they tried to manipulate me directly. When that didn't work, they sought outside support. And when that didn't get them results either, they resorted to collateral damage. That afternoon, while I was working, my phone vibrated with a social media notification. Emily has posted a new story. I don't usually check what she posts, but something inside me told me I should. When I opened the app, the first thing I saw was a blurry photo of a glass of coffee on a hospital table. Below, in dramatic white letters, a message. It hurts when the person who should support you the most is the first to stab you in the back. I sighed. It wasn't a surprise. What did surprise me was the number of messages that started arriving shortly after. People I barely spoke to were sending me texts full of passive-aggressive hints. Mariana, distant cousin, I hope you can sleep while knowing what you did to your sister. Julian, family friend, I didn't expect this from you, Logan. What a disappointment. Even a former college classmate, whom I hadn't spoken to in years, sent me a message. Carla, I don't know if everything they're saying is true, but if it is, shame on you. I went from surprise to rage in a matter of seconds. Emily wasn't just manipulating my parents. Now she was using her network of acquaintances to paint me as the villain in her story. And what did my mother have to say about all this? I decided to call her. She answered on the third ring, with a voice I knew all too well, that of contained resentment. I don't know what you expect me to say, Logan, she said as soon as I answered. You're not a victim here, I retorted, containing my fury. Do you know how many messages I've received today? Do you know how many people are convinced I'm a monster because of Emily? Well, she said with a coldness that chilled me to the bone. If so many people believe the same thing, it's not because there's some truth to it. I remained silent. Mom wasn't just allowing this, she was encouraging it. I see how this is, I finally said, my voice poisoned with weariness. For you, Emily will always be the perfect victim, no matter how much she lies, how much she manipulates, or how much she attacks me. She will always be the poor, misunderstood one, and I will always be the selfish one. Don't talk about your sister like that. Mom snapped. She's going through a lot. Yeah, right? I let out a humorless laugh. And her solution to all her problems is to turn her life into a reality show where I'm the villain. You have no idea what you're talking about. What I have is enough, I stated. And I'm not going to put up with this anymore. I hung up before she could answer. For the first time in my life, I felt that my relationship with them was beyond repair. And I was okay with that. Ignoring them wasn't enough. Enduring the defamation in silence wasn't enough. If I wanted to regain my peace, I had to do something. So I decided to investigate. That same night, I sat down at my computer and began to track down anything I could about Emily's debts. She had mentioned being drowning financially, but she had never said exactly what it was. I knew she didn't have a steady job, that her spending was ridiculous, and that she always found a way to get someone else to pay for her. But something didn't add up. After a couple of searches in public records, I found what I was looking for. Emily not only owed money for irresponsible spending, she had gotten involved in a pyramid scheme. I confirmed it when I found an old post of hers promoting a dubious business. Earn money from home effortlessly. Ask me how. There it was. Not only had she squandered money on luxuries, she had also been naive enough to fall for a scam. And now she wanted me to pay for it. I called my father. He answered after several rings. It's not a good time, Logan, he said wearily. I don't care. I need you to explain something to me. He sighed. If you're going to go on with the same old. Did you know Emily got involved in a pyramid scheme? There was silence on the other end of the line. That's none of your business. It's absolutely my business if you're trying to get me to sell my apartment to pay off her debts. You're not seeing the big picture. No, Dad. What's happening is that you don't like it when I discover the truth. Your sister needs help. No, Dad. Your sister needs to face the consequences of her decisions. The line remained silent for several seconds. Don't expect your mother and I to be on your side in this, he finally said, his voice cold. You never were. And I hung up. I leaned back on the couch, feeling a mixture of fury and satisfaction. Now that I knew the truth, the question was, what was I going to do with it? Knowing the truth wasn't enough. I had to protect myself. The next morning, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Not because I was thinking of suing my family yet, but because I needed to know what to do if they continued to escalate the situation. When I arrived at the office, a middle-aged man in a gray suit greeted me with a firm handshake. He introduced himself as Javier Estrada, a specialist in family matters. Tell me what's going on, he said, taking out a notepad. I explained everything, from the emotional manipulation to the defamation on social media. I told him about Emily's debt, the pressure to sell my apartment, and how my family had tried to interfere with my work. When I finished, Javier was silent for a moment. Then he said calmly, You have several options. I sat up straight. First, he continued, you can ignore them and wait for them to get tired. But from what you describe, I don't think that will happen anytime soon. I nodded. I knew that all too well. Second option, block all contact. Change your number, restrict your social media, make sure they have no way to reach you. I've already tried something similar, I said. But they always find a way to get into my life. Javier rested his elbows on the table. In that case, there is a third option. Legally, you could send them a cease and desist letter. It's a formal document demanding that they stop harassing you. It's not a lawsuit, but it is a notice that if they continue, you could take more serious measures. Does it work? It depends on them. But if they continue to harass you, I never imagined I would get to this point. What do you recommend? Javier looked at me seriously. If you really want this to end, cut off contact completely. There are no half measures with people like that. I left the office with his card in my pocket and my mind made up. No more arguments, no more explanations. My family had just lost access to my life. The first step was blocking them from everything. The second, changing my number. The third, talking to the building manager to make sure no one unauthorized could enter or receive information about me. I had taken every precaution possible, And yet, a part of me knew they wouldn't give up so easily. They soon proved it. Barely a week after sending the cease and desist letter to my parents and Emily, someone knocked on my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I looked through the peephole before opening. It was Emily, not alone, with 2 suitcases. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. No, I wasn't going to fall for this. I opened the door just enough to look at her. "You can't be here," I said firmly. Emily bit her lip, her eyes glassy. "Logan, please, I have nowhere to go." I didn't answer. "Mom and Dad, they kicked me out," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They won't answer my calls. I'm alone." I felt a pang in my chest. If it was true, it was cruel. But I knew better than to believe her. "I'm sorry, Emily," I said. "I can't help you." Her expression changed in an instant. The glassy eyes dried up, the trembling voice disappeared. "Seriously?" she said with an incredulous laugh. "You're going to leave me on the street? It's not my responsibility. You're my brother. And you've been a leech your whole life." I blurted out without a filter. "I don't know if Mom and Dad really kicked you out, or if it's just another one of your lies, but I'm not going to let you make this my problem." Her face contorted with anger. "You're of a person. Then we agree on something." I slammed the door in her face. I don't know how long she stayed out there. Not long enough for me to care. The next day, the building manager called me. "Mr. Logan, a woman was trying to get into your apartment last night." He didn't need to tell me who. "Don't let her in." And I hung up, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. My family had played all their cards, and I had won. The first few weeks without contact were strange. Not because I missed them, but because I was used to living under the constant shadow of their manipulations. The silence was something new, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. My productivity at work improved. I slept better. My weekends were no longer filled with calls from my mother or dramas manufactured by Emily. But, as always, the tranquility didn't last long. One afternoon, while checking my email, I saw a message with a subject line that made my blood run cold. "Your sister is in the hospital." It was from an unknown number. My first impulse was to ignore it, but something inside me forced me to open it. "Logan, I know you don't want anything to do with us, but Emily is in the hospital. I don't know what to do. I called Mom and Dad, but they're not answering. She's bad, Logan, really bad." My heart raced. Was it another trap, or was it real this time? I opened my browser and searched the number. It belonged to Andrea, a friend of Emily's. That made it harder to ignore. It could be a lie, yes, but it could also be something serious. I spent 10 minutes pacing back and forth in my apartment, debating. In the end, I gave in. Not because I wanted to save Emily, but because if something really serious had happened, I didn't want to live with the doubt. I grabbed my keys and left. When I arrived at the hospital, the first thing I felt was that I had made a mistake. The emergency room was crowded, but I quickly found Andrea. Emily's friend was sitting on one of the waiting room benches, checking her phone. I approached cautiously. "Andrea." She looked up, surprised. "Logan, I didn't think you'd come." "Neither did I admitted. "What happened?" Andrea sighed and put her phone away. Emily fainted in her apartment. She wasn't responding to messages, so I went to see her and found her on the floor. "Is she conscious?" "Yes, but the doctors said she's malnourished and dehydrated. It seems like she hasn't been eating well." I felt a pang of frustration. Was this part of the drama, or had she really reached this point? "Where are my parents?" "I don't know," Andrea replied. "Emily called them, but they haven't shown up." That surprised me. My parents had always been there for her. "Why not now?" "Can I see her?" I asked, not knowing exactly why. Andrea hesitated, but finally nodded. "She's in room 214. I headed down the hall, feeling a mixture of weariness and resignation. When I entered the room, Emily was lying in bed, with an IV in her arm. She looked fragile, not the haughty and manipulative Emily I was used to. She looked at me with tired eyes. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Me neither." An awkward silence hung between us. "I can't do this anymore, Logan," she whispered. Everything got out of hand. Her words took me by surprise. For the first time, she didn't seem to be acting. I didn't know what to say, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of compassion. But compassion wasn't the same as forgiveness. Emily looked at me with tired eyes, waiting for me to say something. I just watched her. I couldn't deny that her condition was real. She was pale, with dark circles under her eyes, and her body looked thinner than usual. But I also knew that this didn't change everything she had done. What do you want me to do, Emily? I finally asked, my voice neutral. She sighed, sinking into the pillow. I don't know. I don't know how I got here. I couldn't help but let out a dry laugh. Really? You have no idea? Her jaw tightened. I don't need you to remind me, Logan. No, of course not, I said. But you do need to remember that every decision you made brought you here. Emily lowered her gaze. For the first time, she didn't try to argue. I took a deep breath and crossed my arms. I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully. She looked up cautiously. I don't hate you, Emily, but I'm not going to save you either. Her lips trembled. I don't want you to save me. Yes, you did, I interrupted. For years. And every time someone tried to help you, you just used it as an excuse to keep doing the same thing. Her eyes filled with tears. This time is different. I shook my head. Maybe it is. But that doesn't mean it's my problem. Emily remained silent. She didn't plead with me. She didn't yell. She didn't try to make me feel guilty. She just nodded. Okay. Her response surprised me, but I didn't stay to analyze it. I stood up and grabbed my keys. Take care of yourself, Emily. And I left the room without looking back. When I left the hospital, I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel relief. Just a quiet certainty. I had closed a door that I would never open again. In the following days, my parents didn't look for me. Not a call, not a message. Neither did Emily. For the first time in my life, my family wasn't in my shadow. And it felt good. 2 weeks later, I made a decision. I put my apartment up for sale. Not because I needed the money, but because I wanted to start over. When I signed the papers and handed over the keys, I realized something. Everything I had before was tied to my past. My home, my phone number, even my routine. So I left it all behind. I moved to another city, got a new apartment, a new job. And with each passing day, I realized that peace isn't something you're given. It's something you choose. And for the first time in my life, I chose to live for myself. Story 6. I bought my mom a house and paid all the bills, but at a family gathering, she said, "You give us nothing but headaches." Everyone sided with her, until I announced I wouldn't be paying for their luxurious lifestyle anymore. I could still hear the echo of my mother's words long after she'd uttered them. You never give us anything but headaches. The dining room was plunged into a heavy silence. My family stared everywhere but at me. My uncle stirred his coffee, my aunt shifted in her seat, and my cousins suddenly found their phones fascinating. But not one, not a single one, spoke up for me. The sting of it burned more than I cared to admit. I'd bought this house for my mother. I'd covered all the bills: electricity, water, food, even the internet my younger cousins used to watch their favorite shows. I made sure. I finally said, my voice quiet but firm. I pay for everything. This house, the bills, the food, she snapped, cutting me off. You act like you're doing us a favor, but a real daughter wouldn't keep track. A real daughter. I swallowed the lump in my throat and let my gaze sweep across the room. My brother, Mark, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, his face unreadable. My sister-in-law avoided my eyes. My cousins remained silent. No one was on my side. I took a deep breath. Okay, I said. My mother frowned. Okay, what? Okay, I repeated. If my help is such a burden, then I won't burden you anymore. The room tensed. My mother's lips parted slightly, as if she'd expected me to argue, to plead for some scrap of appreciation. But I was done begging for something that should have been freely given. I'm done paying for this house. I'm done covering your bills. I'm done financing this entire family while being treated like a stranger. My uncle coughed, uncomfortable. My aunt's eyes widened, and Mark finally leaned forward. Wait, no. No. I interrupted, shaking my head. All of you stayed silent while she said that to me. You let her pretend that I'm nothing but a nuisance. Fine. Let's see how you all do without me. I grabbed my purse and turned to leave. Then, the panic hit. I walked out of that dining room with my head held high. But the moment I crossed the threshold, my hands started to tremble, my breath came faster than I wanted it to, and my heart pounded in my chest. I'd done it. For the first time in years, I'd set a boundary, and yet, instead of feeling liberated, I felt hollow. I got into my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I knew what would come next. The family would rally around her and soon paint me as the selfish, ungrateful daughter who abandoned them. But this time, I wouldn't let them drag me back in. My phone vibrated. Mom, come back inside. You're overreacting. Then, another. Mark, what are you doing? You can't just leave like this. I turned off my phone and drove away. The silence from my family over the next few days was deafening. No calls, no messages, nothing. It was unsettling, like the calm before the storm. Then, on the third day, the messages started flooding in. Mom, the electric bill is due. I hope you weren't serious about what you said. Mark, Mom's crying. Do you really want to do this to her? Aunt Lisa, honey, families have disagreements, but cutting everyone off isn't the answer. Let's talk. I ignored them all, and then, as if on cue, the guilt tripping morphed into rage. Mom, I can't believe you're doing this to us after everything I've done for you. Mark, you're so selfish. Do you think money makes you better than us? Selfish. That word again, the one they used every time I didn't bend over backward for them. I let out a bitter laugh, dropping my phone onto the bed. Then, I heard a knock on the door. I knew who it was before I opened it. Mark stood on my porch, arms crossed, face tight with irritation. You made your point, he said. Now stop being dramatic and fix this. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Fix what? You know what, he snapped. Mom's freaking out. The bills are piling up, and you're just what? Leaving. I tilted my head. Why would that be my problem? His jaw tightened. Because you're the one who always takes care of everything. And maybe that's the problem, I replied calmly. Maybe it's time for someone else to step up. Mark let out a dry laugh. Who? Mom. She doesn't work. I have my own expenses. I raised an eyebrow. And I don't. You make more than all of us, he retorted. It's not the same. Ah, there it was. The reason they felt entitled to my money. The fact that I earn more doesn't mean I owe you anything, I said. I bought that house for Mom. I've covered all the bills, every grocery trip, every emergency. And instead of being grateful, you're twisting my words. I didn't mean it. I was upset. I shook my head. She didn't mean it. And the worst part is, no one defended me. Not even you. He looked away. Silence. For the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. You don't understand, he finally muttered. Mom's scared. She doesn't know how to handle things without you. Then maybe she should have thought about that before humiliating me in front of the entire family, I said, stepping back inside. I'm done, Mark. Figure it out. And with that, I closed the door. The next week was chaos. Mom called every relative she could, twisting the story to her advantage. She abandoned us. She's punishing me just because I asked for respect. She's selfish, greedy. She only cares about money. Some relatives immediately sided with her, sending me messages about how family is everything and how I'd regret this someday. But others started to see the cracks. Aunt Lisa, honey, I didn't know you were paying for all of that. That's not fair to you. Cousin Rachel, wait, you bought the house and she still treats you like that. Mom hadn't counted on people asking questions, and when they did, her perfect victim act began to crumble. By the end of the month, she called me herself. Not to apologize, but to beg. Please, just cover the bills for one more month. We're struggling. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and gave her the same answer I'd given Mark. Figure it out. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. The silence was deafening. The first few days after my departure were strangely quiet. No messages, no calls, not even a snide social media comment from a nosy cousin. It was as if my existence had been suddenly erased. At first, I felt relief. I woke up without the constant burden of responsibilities that weren't mine. I went to work without the invisible weight of every bill I had to pay for others. I came home without expecting someone to text me demanding something. But, after the third day, I started to notice the absence of something else. It wasn't just the lack of noise from my family, but the lack of purpose. For years, I had built my life around them, meeting their needs, anticipating their problems, making sure they lacked nothing. And now what? I forced myself not to dwell on it. At the office, I tried to focus on work. However, for the first time in a long time, I realized how much energy my family had been stealing from me. I was exhausted, as if I'd spent years in a war without realizing it. You look different, commented Sophia, one of my colleagues. I don't know, more relaxed. I laughed automatically. Maybe because I finally slept well. I didn't tell her the truth. I didn't tell her that my family had emotionally exiled me, that they were probably at that very moment painting me as the villain to every relative patient enough to listen. After work, I decided to treat myself. I went to an expensive restaurant, one of those places where I would have previously felt guilty for spending money on myself. I ordered a glass of wine and a dish I would normally have considered an unnecessary luxury. As I ate, I looked at my phone out of habit. No messages, no calls. Was this freedom? Before I could answer myself, the screen lit up with a notification. Rachel, my cousin. My heart skipped a beat. I hesitated before opening the message, but finally did. Rachel, can we talk? I don't want to argue, just understand. I let out a sigh. At least someone in the family wasn't coming with a load of guilt and accusations. I decided to answer. Me, okay. Tell me where and when. Rachel quickly replied. Rachel, Brisa Cafe, tomorrow at 5 p.m. My treat. It was a peace offering. I finished my dinner in silence, enjoying the feeling of not owing anything to anyone. Tomorrow I would face my first encounter with someone from the family. I didn't know if I was ready, but I was going anyway. I arrived at the cafe a few minutes early. Not because of anxiety, I told myself, but simply because I like to be punctual. Still, I couldn't help but notice the tension in my own shoulders as I waited for Rachel. When she finally walked in, her expression was neutral, but there was something in her eyes. Not judgment, not anger, but curiosity. She sat down across from me with a sigh and ordered a latte before looking at me. So, really then, she began, swirling the spoon in her cup. The house, the bills, was all that true? I let out a dry laugh. Yes, it was true. Rachel pursed her lips. Why didn't you ever say anything? What for? I shrugged. No one would have believed me. Or worse, they would have known and not cared. Rachel didn't try to deny it. Instead, she sighed and looked out the window. They've been, well, you know how they are. Saying you suddenly went crazy, that you had a selfish attack. And what do you think, Rachel? Rachel looked me straight in the eye. I think Mom taught me to mind my own business, but I also think you've been carrying this family on your back for longer than anyone should. Her honesty disarmed me. I was silent for a moment, processing what she had just said. How is she? I finally asked. Rachel studied me for a few seconds before answering. Angry, hurt, but more than anything, worried. I frowned. Worried. Rachel leaned her elbows on the table. She doesn't know what to do without you. No one does. And believe me, they've tried asking others for help, but no one wants to carry what you carried for years. I felt a lump forming in my throat, but it wasn't sadness, it was fury. Of course, when I was there, no one valued what I did, but now that I wasn't, it was suddenly a problem. Rachel sighed. What I mean is, be prepared. I don't think this is the end of the drama. It wasn't, and I would find out very soon. The first message arrived the next day. Mom, I'm not feeling well. I don't know what I'm going to do without your help. I didn't reply. A few hours later, another one arrived. Mom, I'm very sick. Everything hurts. If you were here, you could help me. I sighed, setting the phone aside. This wasn't the first time she'd tried this. I knew exactly how it worked. First came the guilt, then the reproach, and finally, the rage. It was a cycle I had promised myself I would escape. But then, Mark called. Are you really going to ignore her? His tone was harsh, more impatient than concerned. She's sick, and you're not even going to see her. I bit my lip. What's wrong with her exactly? I don't know, he said, frustrated. She doesn't want to go to the doctor. She says she just needs to rest, but she's very depressed. She's barely eating. Ah, there it was. It wasn't a physical illness. It was the despair of having lost her control over me. If she's sick, take her to the doctor, I replied, keeping my voice firm. I'm not a doctor. Mark scoffed. It's not just that, and you know it. Mom is suffering, and you're just what? Abandoning her. I didn't abandon her, I said calmly. She made it clear she didn't want anything from me except headaches. So I granted her wish. Mark was silent. He knew I was right, but he didn't want to admit it. Finally, he let out a huff. What you're doing is cruel. I smiled mirthlessly. What I did was set a boundary. I hung up before he had a chance to manipulate me further. I spent the rest of the day with my phone on silent. I didn't want to see any more pleading messages or guilt-ridden calls. But, in my mind, Mark's words kept repeating, Mom is suffering. What you're doing is cruel. The guilt was still there, persistent, uncomfortable. But this time, I wasn't going to give in. A few days passed before the family attacked again. It wasn't with apologies. It wasn't with understanding. It was with hypocrisy. First, a message from my Aunt Lisa. Aunt Lisa, honey, how have you been? We haven't talked in a while. I'd like to see you. I rolled my eyes. Lisa hadn't texted me to see me in years. Just a few minutes later, another message arrived. Aunt Lisa, your mother told me that the situation has been difficult. I know there must be misunderstandings, but family is family. We can't walk away because of a momentary anger. There it was, the real motive. I didn't answer. A few hours later, my cousin Laura tried the same thing. Laura, hi, gorgeous. I saw some pictures of you and thought we should go out together sometime. I miss talking to you. But when I didn't take the bait, her tone changed. Laura, Mom says your mom is really bad. Don't you think it's been enough? I laughed humorlessly. It hadn't taken them a day to show their true colors. The next blow came when I went to the supermarket. I was checking the shelves when I heard a familiar voice. Look at her, so calm. I turned and saw my Uncle Roberto looking at me with disapproval. Excuse me, should you be proud of yourself? He said, crossing his arms. Your mother is wasting away, and you're here shopping like nothing's wrong. I took a deep breath, refusing to play his game. And what do you want me to do, Roberto? He frowned. Be a decent daughter. I smiled coldly. Oh, right, like when I was paying for everything and being treated like trash. His expression hardened. Don't talk about your mother like that. She's done a lot for you. Yes, I said. She taught me exactly how I don't want to live my life. I walked past him without waiting for another response. Once upon a time, that conversation would have destroyed me. I would have gone home shaking, full of doubts, feeling guilty. But now I just felt rage. The selective family only came back when they needed something from me. And this time, I wasn't giving them anything. I didn't expect Mark to contact me again so soon after our last conversation. I figured he'd back off for a while, hoping my resistance would weaken. But no. One afternoon, while I was checking emails on my laptop, I heard a knock on my door. Loud, impatient. I knew who it was before I opened it. You made your point, was the first thing Mark said, arms crossed in the doorway. I looked at him without inviting him in. I don't know what you mean, Mark. Mark scoffed. Come on already. You proved your point. Mom's a mess. The bills are piling up, and you're just what? Leaving? I tilted my head. Why would that be my problem? He frowned, irritated. Because you're the one who always takes care of everything. There it was, the truth, unfiltered. Maybe that's the problem, I said calmly. Maybe it's time for someone else to step up. Mark let out a dry laugh. Who? Mom. She doesn't work. I have my own expenses. And I don't. He looked at me as if I'd just said the stupidest thing in the world. You make more than all of us. It's not the same. Ah, right. Because having more money automatically meant I had to support them. The fact that I earn more doesn't mean I owe you anything. I replied, my patience wearing thin. I bought that house for Mom. I've covered all the bills, every grocery trip, every emergency. And instead of being grateful, you're twisting my words. I didn't mean it. I was upset. I shook my head. She didn't mean it. And the worst part is, no one defended me. Not even you. He looked away. Silence. For the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. You don't understand, he finally muttered. Mom's scared. She doesn't know how to handle things without you. Then maybe she should have thought about that before humiliating me in front of the entire family, I said, stepping back inside. I'm done, Mark. Figure it out. And with that, I closed the door. This time, I didn't hesitate. I didn't expect them to take it this far. I had ignored the calls, ignored the messages, closed the door in Mark's face. But I wasn't prepared for this. Mom was going to sell the house. I found out from Rachel. She called me in the morning, her tone tense, different. I don't know if you should know this, but Mom told the family she's thinking about selling the house. I felt the air catch in my throat. Selling the house. She says she can't maintain it on her own, and that it's your fault because you abandoned her. That she has no other choice now. I was silent. Not because I was surprised. I knew my mother was capable of manipulating any situation to her advantage. But because, for the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt rage. A cold, controlled rage. Does she even know how much the house is worth? I finally asked. Rachel sighed. No, and I doubt she cares. She just wants people to feel sorry for her. Of course. It wasn't about the house. It wasn't about the bills. It was about control. If she sold the house, she could blame me. She could use it as a tragic story to make me look like the heartless daughter who left her on the street. If she does, it's not my problem, I said finally, calmer than I felt. I gave her everything. If she decides to throw it away, That's her decision. Rachel hesitated. Mom and Mark don't see it that way. They say if you really cared, you'd stop this from happening. I let out a humorless laugh. How? By going back and paying for everything again? No. That cycle is broken, Rachel. Listen, I said, my voice firmer. I know you care about the family, and I respect that. But this time, I'm not saving them. She didn't answer immediately. Finally, she sighed. I know. I just wanted to warn you. We hung up, and I stared at the phone in my hand. Mom was going to sell the house. I could try to convince her not to. I could try to reason with her. But I wouldn't. Not this time. If she wanted to destroy what I gave her, let her. I wasn't going to rescue her anymore. When I woke up the next day, the first feeling I had was lightness. Not fear, not anxiety. Lightness. My mother could do whatever she wanted with the house. My family could gossip all they wanted. Mark could get as angry as he wanted. I was out of the game. And that gave me a freedom I hadn't felt in years. That day, instead of checking my phone in fear of new manipulative messages, I did something different. I booked an appointment with a therapist. Not because I was broken, not because I needed someone to tell me I was right, but because I needed to understand why I had allowed myself to be treated like that for so long. It's an important step, the therapist said when she greeted me. Not many have the courage to analyze themselves. It's not courage, I admitted. It's necessity. We talked about my childhood, about how, from a young age, I learned that love was earned through sacrifice. Your role in the family wasn't that of a daughter, but of an emotional and financial provider, the therapist said. When you tried to step out of that role, your family reacted with anger because it challenged the system they had established with you. I nodded. And now that I'm no longer in that system, what happens? The therapist smiled slightly. It collapses. And it was. I knew it when Rachel texted me a few days later. Rachel, Mom and the others are panicking. Mark is furious because he doesn't know how to manage the bills. Aunt Lisa says she always knew this would happen. And Mom, well, now she's saying it was a mistake to want to sell the house. I chuckled softly as I read it. And what did they expect, Rachel? That you'd come back like you always did? I wouldn't. This time I was choosing myself. That night, I had a quiet dinner, watching a show without interruptions. And, for the first time in my life, I felt that my time belonged completely to me. The news came faster than I expected. Rachel texted me early in the morning. Rachel, the family is talking, and not in the way Mom wants. I settled into bed before responding. Me, what happened? Rachel, well, Mom tried to do her show again. She said you'd left her ruined, that she was going to lose the house, that no one was helping her. Me, let me guess, someone asked uncomfortable questions. Rachel, exactly. Aunt Clara asked why. If you'd bought the house and paid for everything for years, no one defended you when Mom humiliated you at the family dinner. I smiled. Rachel. Then Uncle Roberto asked how it was possible that Mark was more worried about you coming back to pay the bills, instead of looking for solutions himself. There was the crack in her story. My mother had lived her entire life manipulating the narrative, making sure she was the victim and I was the ungrateful one. But now, people were starting to connect the dots. Me. And what did Mom and Mark say? Rachel. Mom acted offended and said that no one understood how difficult it was for her. Mark just kept quiet. I think even he's starting to realize the truth. Me. Not my problem, Rachel. I know. Silence. Then, one last message. Rachel, I think you did the right thing. I took a deep breath. I knew it, but it was good to hear it from someone else. I heard the knock on the door and knew it was her. Not Mark. Not Rachel. Mom. I took a deep breath before opening it. There she was, her face tired, but with the same expression as always, that of a queen waiting to be obeyed. We can talk, she said, as if she were doing me a favor. I crossed my arms. Talk or manipulate. She pursed her lips. Don't be dramatic. I just want to understand why you're doing this. I let out a dry laugh. I'm not doing anything. You put yourself in this situation. Do you really believe that? She crossed her arms, mirroring my posture. Do you really think you don't owe me anything after everything I've done for you? And there it was. The guilt. The blackmail. The invisible emotional debt she'd always used against me. What did you do for me, Mom? I raised you. She responded immediately. I gave you everything I could. And how many times did you remind me of that? As if it were a favor. I asked without looking away. Raising a child is not a transaction. It's not a debt that the child has to pay for the rest of their life. She was silent for a moment. Then she scoffed. Look how you talk now. Like a stranger. Like someone who thinks she's above her family. I'm not above, I said calmly. I just realized I was never part of the family. Her face hardened. And what do you want? For me to kneel and beg for your forgiveness. I looked at her. I want you to understand that you can't control me anymore. She pressed her lips together, as if trying to contain something. You know, sooner or later you'll regret this, she whispered. You won't have anyone when you need us. I smiled slightly. The difference is, I don't need you, Mom. She looked at me as if she didn't recognize me. As if the docile daughter she had raised had completely vanished. Perhaps she had. Finally, she took a step back. I hope you're happy with your decision. I will be. I closed the door. And with that, her power over me died forever. The day my mother left, I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel guilt, nor fear, nor that suffocating anxiety that used to invade me after every confrontation with her. All I felt was peace. Peace, because, for the first time in my life, I chose myself. The following weeks were strangely quiet. No calls, no guilt-tripping messages, no one demanding anything. Mark stopped trying to convince me. Rachel kept in touch, but with clear boundaries. And the rest of the family, well, when they realized they couldn't manipulate me, they simply walked away. And that was okay. I began to rebuild myself. I went to therapy regularly. I dedicated myself to work with renewed energy. I went out with friends, laughed without fear, enjoyed the simple pleasure of spending money on myself, without remorse. One afternoon, while having coffee in a park, I realized something. For the first time, my time was truly mine. I didn't have to justify myself to anyone. I didn't have to worry about what bills to pay, who would demand something from me, what new family drama would erupt next. I was free. I took out my phone and checked my messages. Rachel had written, Rachel, Mom keeps saying that someday you'll regret this. I smiled. I don't think so. I turned off my phone and continued to enjoy the afternoon. The sun was shining, the air was fresh, and, for the first time in my life, I felt like I truly belonged to myself.